Chapter 1712. She clearly had 6 arms, but the subtle differences in the use of power resulted in Vashti using one arm to withstand Arthas's full-powered slashes with both arms. The 6 consecutive slashes were too fast for Vashti, who had reduced her speed. It was as if she had withstood 6 slashes in an instant. At this time, Queen Sylvanas' lightning arrow had just arrived. Clang! The arrow was knocked away by Frostmourne. The blazing lightning struck Arthas's right arm, but it was instantly neutralized by the even more powerful ice element. Tisk! Vashti spat fiercely. While her 6 arms were numb, she could only flick her snake tail to force Arthas back. At the same time, she used the momentum to retreat and finally floated out of the range of the Lich King's sword aura unscathed. At this time, it was only the 3rd round of the 3 women besieging Arthas. In these few exchanges, not to mention gaining the upper hand. When they fought, they just barely didn't get hurt. Just a moment ago, Queen Sylvie had been in high spirits, but now, there was only a deathly stillness about her. In the previous rounds, they had tried almost everything. The last move. Queen Sylvanas pulled herself together and shouted. As Duque's woman and a companion with a common goal, Sylvanas had long taken the opportunity to look for them to discuss the problem of cooperation. After all, demigods working together would have the best chance of killing an existence like Arthas, who stood at the peak of the demigod realm. Unexpectedly, she really used the biggest trick that she had prepared in advance. The storm was gathering. The wind rolled up, and in the blink of an eye, a lightning tornado appeared. It was not inferior to the ice storm, Grim Winter, that Arthas had conjured. In a moment, all the ice and snow within 100 feet of Queen Sylvanas were instantly annihilated by the intense pressure of the highly concentrated wind element. They were not crushed into powder in the physical sense, but forcibly annihilated into nothingness. For the first time, Arthas's eyes revealed a serious look. Glancing at Vashti, who had yet to attack, Arthas slammed Frostmourne into the ground. Strong frost aura began to fill his body. Thunder rumbled, and a lightning arrow shot out from the divine artifact, Solidar Wrath of the Stars, aimed at Arthas' forehead. It was as if he wanted to blow up the Lich King's head. Unfortunately, the powerful arrow landed squarely on the ice wall of spiritual energy that Arthas had stirred up. Not only did it not break through, but a strong white light flashed out of the mist of spiritual energy and bounced the lightning arrow back. Sylvanas, who was flying at high speed with the Black Dragon Princess, was almost shot down as well. If it was just thunder, Queen Sylvie would not mind retrieving her arrows. Unfortunately, the arrow that bounced back had already been infused with an even more evil power. Onyxia's sudden descent, coupled with Queen Syriana's urgent crouching, allowed her to barely avoid this counterattack. However, the icy chill that came from her back still slightly invaded Queen Syriana's body. Ugh! Queen Sylvie could not help but let out a muffled groan. One could imagine the power of a demigod of wind's full-powered attack. The arrow that was bounced back eventually fell in front of the square of the ice throne, driven by the cold wind. The dozens of crisscrossing, fragmented cracks on the hard tiles of the square were proof. However, this was still unable to do anything to Arthas. But it was enough to attract his attention. Vashti, who had adjusted, pounced forward again. This time, all 6 of her weapons were surrounded by flashing lightning. The crisscrossing blade radiance formed a ball of destructive light. The frost aura that Arthas had set up in the surroundings was also dispersed by this storm of blades. Arthas raised his left hand, and a ball of ice elemental energy swept towards Vashti like a mage's icicle spell. But her 6 swords had already turned into a meat grinder along with her body, madly chopping at the elemental energy that was coming her way. On the epic-level weapons, the sharp edges of the blades flashed with lightning. However, these epic-level weapons that could split open the body of any Ice Crown Fortress leader seemed to be under great pressure, and they let out a trembling sound that symbolized weakness. Queen Sylvanas, who was on the dragon's back, could not help but let out a scream. At this moment, with a series of cracking sounds, those epic weapons that were incomparably precious in the eyes of mortals actually shattered like fragile glass at this moment. Not to mention Queen Sylvanas, even Vashti herself was stunned. Seeing that Frostmourne was fiercely slashing towards her, Vashti finally pulled down her face and took out 6 epic-level shields from her storage bag. Bang bang bang. It was just one slash, but 3 of Vashti's shields exploded. Her Naga body, which was not petite, was directly sent flying by Arthas. If it were not for the 3rd attack, Arthas would not have let go of this opportunity to pursue and attack. This was the attack routine that the 3 of them came up with. Sylvanas attacked first, using his bow and arrows to attract Arthas's attention. When Vashti entangled him, Onyxia directly came up with a deep breath. In the sky, the huge figure of the Black Dragon Princess enveloped Arthas. The deep breath that caused countless people's expressions to change poured onto Arthas's head without deviation. However, the effect was not good. The hit was a hit. As soon as the fiery dragon's breath entered the frost domain around Arthas's body, it immediately disappeared into nothingness. Even the fire elements in the periphery were directly absorbed and flew straight to the center of the frost domain. Onyxia screamed, "How can we fight this?" The high-purity fire elements that I have been brewing for so long were all devoured by him. We are not on the same level at all. No wonder the Black Dragon Princess looked like she had seen a ghost. All the attack methods were ineffective. Anyone would not be able to help but curse. Vashti suddenly smiled bitterly. Why do I feel like we are all fake demigods? Although the demigod-level elemental power was almost the top mystical rule in the world of Azeroth, there was still a difference in the degree of mysticism between them. Simply borrowing elements, no matter how purified and concentrated, could not shake Lich King Arthas. They did not know that before injecting their spirit and their unique rule into the elements. The elements borrowed from the elemental realm could not shake Arthas' rule in the slightest. What's more, Arthas, who had the geographical advantage, had the magic and elements stored in the entire Ice Throne as a backup. Chapter 1713. The huge difference in strength made Sylvanas' heart turn cold for a moment. She had trained hard for so many years, but the gap between her and Arthas did not seem to be narrowing. Instead, it seemed to be getting bigger. Once upon a time, Arthas was strong, but it was only in terms of quantity. The endless undead army seemed to be an inexhaustible dark force. In terms of quality, he did not feel that there was a chasm between them. But now, Sylvanas and the others were depressed, because the 3 of them suddenly discovered that Arthas could actually take away their elements. It was not like the Lich King who played with ice had changed to become a fire mage or a nature shaman, but it was a typical method of harming others without benefiting oneself. He infected all the elements that were temporarily out of control with Frost Plague. This was more like marking or leaving a signature for one's own belongings. To break it, one could only use their own willpower to dispel the will of the Lich King, and then redeclare the ownership of this part of the elements. Even if Sylvanas had strong willpower and spirit attributes, as a ranger, she was not good at spreading her own willpower and controlling the elements around her. This kind of battle in the spirit domain happened to be her weakness. After becoming a demigod of wind, she had worked hard in this area. Unfortunately, compared to a certain Lich King who had lost his body, was stuffed into an ice skeleton, and only relied on his spirit for the past 20 years, Queen Sylvanas was completely nothing. The situation made the 3 women very miserable. Playing close combat with Arthas, he played elements with you and even slowed down Vashti to a lower speed, and then defeated Vashti with gorgeous skills. Playing elements with Arthas, the 3 of them could not beat him. Left with no choice, Sylvanas could only encourage the female dragon under her to fight head-on. Onyxia, now it's up to you. You don't want to go back and punish Duque, do you? Actually, I'm not afraid. If it's a small punishment, I will. If the dragon's face was not black, it was estimated that the dragon's face would be red. Queen Sylvanas heard the sound of saliva swallowing. Queen Sylvanas cursed the shameless dragon in her heart, and could only change the direction. You also don't want Duque to ignore you. If it's a placement play, damn. Left with no choice, Queen Sylvia used her trump card. If you don't work hard, Duque won't want you anymore. This was a little scary. Onyxia shivered, but in the end she mustered up her courage and charged towards Arthis. Since it was the black dragon, Vashti decisively turned to support. There wasn't enough space for a black dragon to charge and let her participate. She began to fight for control of the frost elements. At the very least, she had to attract Arthis' attention. In fact, she did. After Duque's reminder, Vashti began to specialize in the water elemental domain. After all, this was what she was truly good at and what she could do to the extreme. Frost is a derivative of water. While Vashti was focused on fighting for the water elements in the air, Arthis did feel threatened. The Ice Crown Castle was the pinnacle of the land of ice and snow, as well as the largest node of the ice element mana vein. However, the natural laws of the world did not stipulate that this node must belong to the Lich King. Vashti seizing control of the water elemental energy here was no doubt digging at his roots. As the two fought, it was clear that this was a tug-of-war where one side had the absolute advantage. After all, Arthis could quickly corrupt the frost elements and bring them under his control, while Vashti's purification of the shadowized frost elements was too slow. However, if he dared to let it go, Vashti would dare to snatch it. She didn't hope to succeed, she just wanted to attract Arthis' attention. This was the spiciness of Vashti. Arthis had no choice but to free up his left hand and spread his fingers, strengthening the control of the frost elements in Vashti's direction. A chance! Xianxia was secretly delighted. She couldn't help but flap her wings a few times, suddenly raising her already very fast speed to the highest level. On her back, Queen Sylph knocked an arrow and once again condensed a powerful lightning arrow, preparing to slap Arthis in the face at almost zero distance. Ho ho ho! How terrifying was a dragon aspect's all-out charge. One could tell just by looking at the frost elements that were forcefully pushed aside. The frost elements that contained the power of darkness seemed to scream and dodge in front of this dragon aspect that was covered in blazing fire elements. The frost elements that were pushed aside continued to spread to both sides, bringing about endless waves in the entire space of the throne. The overly condensed frost elements swept across the already narrow throne platform, and thick pillars were instantly covered in a thick layer of ice wherever they passed. The pillars that were supposed to be incomparably hard let out light cracking sounds. That was due to the pressure of a large amount of ice under the rapid freezing. If there was water in some of the small holes in the stone pillars, then when the water turned into ice, the increase in volume would in turn burst the stone pillars. Under the Black Dragon Princess's imposing manner, the three ladies all felt that Arthis would dodge. They were all wrong. Arthis did not dodge. Frostmourne slashed upwards from below, shooting out a sword wind. The destructive power of this top-notch artifact was completely revealed at this moment. The sword wind swept across the platform that was suspended in the void, and swept past a huge curved fong made of ice. A straight black line immediately appeared on the fong, and that black line went from bottom to top, directly splitting the hard fong that was as thick as a dragon's leg into two. Time seemed to be frozen at this moment. In Queen Sylvanas' opinion, the Black Dragon Princess could completely resist this blow, and then rush over to give Arthis a ruthless bite. Perhaps she would suffer some injuries, but at least she could open up the situation. However, with her resolute personality, she neglected Xianxia's cowardice, and also neglected that she wasn't Duque. If the one riding the Black Dragon Princess was Duque, she would definitely be 100 times more courageous. Even if she was facing Sargeras at full strength, she might have the courage to charge. Unfortunately, she was Sylvanas, just one of Duque's women. That natural distrust and the cowardice after being subdued made Xianxia flap her right wing at the last moment, and make a movement similar to a side roll. No! Queen Sylvanas only had time to let out a scream. It was indeed a dodge, but in the process of dodging, the Black Dragon Princess couldn't help but expose her dragon abdomen. Arthis raised the Frostmourne that had already been raised, and made another slash. As a last resort, Sylvanas shot out the thunder arrow that had already been charged. Chapter 17:14. Whether it was Sylvanas's lightning arrow or Vashti's elemental fight, whichever side succeeded would cause Arthis great losses. Arthis did not dodge or evade. Hundreds of cubic meters of frost elemental energy were snatched away from him. The lightning arrow, which would have been easily blocked in the past, hit Arthas without any hindrance. Due to the deviation of the angle, the arrow was aimed at his chest instead. Arthas took the full brunt of the arrow. Lightning snakes writhed in his chest, and even the skeleton carvings on his heavy armor cracked from the arrow. Cracks spread out like a spider web. It was foreseeable that the damage of this arrow would not be low. If this was before, Queen Sylvanas would definitely be overjoyed. But at this moment, her heart sank into the ice abyss. An attack that Arthas risked injury to launch was definitely not child's play. Frostmourne drew a full stop to this attack. Xianxia knew that it was her fault, but she still held onto a sliver of hope and prayed that Arthas would not hit her. Unfortunately, in the next moment, she suddenly felt a shiver pass through her body. That feeling scared her into curling up subconsciously. Immediately, she saw a cold black light sweep over her body. Even though she tried to dodge as much as possible, she still felt pain in her lower body and right wing. The heart-wrenching pain, accompanied by the power of darkness, quickly spread from the wound to every corner of her body. It was like a boulder falling into a calm lake, creating circles of huge waves. Between the peaks and troughs of the waves, white and black spiritual power flickered continuously. This power formed a structure similar to a spider web, and it began to quickly corrode Xianxia's body. "It's over!" Xianxia tried to balance her body again. At the same time, she swung her tail fiercely, thinking that at the very least, both sides would be injured. But Arthas, who had his hands free, ignored Vashj, who was swinging her sword at him, and grabbed at the black dragon with his left hand. Death's grasp. With Arthas's strength, it was effortless for him to restrain a black dragon that weighed dozens of tons. That unexpected loss of balance once again disrupted the black dragon princess's rhythm. Sylvanas protected him with all his might, and then shot another arrow with all his might. Arthas' left pauldron was instantly destroyed by the arrow. One could even clearly see that the deltoid muscle on his shoulder looked as if it had been gnawed on by a wild beast. Arthas did not care and stabbed the dragon a third time. This time, the sword stabbed into the dragon's abdomen, causing the black dragon to let out an earth-shattering wail. Vashj had arrived. The frost aura around Arthas suddenly exploded. With him as the center, an ice mountain expanded at an astonishing speed of 100 meters per second. The 6 new epic-ranked weapons slashed at the iceberg, but the speed at which the iceberg was destroyed was only slightly faster than the speed at which it was formed. It would be too late to complete the attack on the Lich King. The next moment, Arthas brandished his sword and charged at Vashj. 2 white, angel-like soul creatures, Wagri's shadow guards, with 2 wings and 2 wings as their foundation, suddenly charged out of the void. They caught Vashj off guard and threw themselves at her, hugging her tightly. That earth-shattering suppression actually made her unable to break free for a moment. Arthas had arrived. After breaking through the iceberg, he displayed Frostmourne horizontally to Vashj in a strange posture. The eye sockets of the terrifying skull carvings on the blade flickered with heart-palpitating flames of the netherworld. Vashj had never experienced such a feeling. She couldn't help but look at the skull. Suddenly, she heard a noisy soul voice. In this voice, there seemed to be hundreds and thousands of people talking and whispering. It was like the palace banquet in Azhara 10,000 years ago. She clearly wanted to refuse this noise that constantly echoed in her ears, but the queen's orders forced her to listen to every voice, trying to find a secret conversation that was disadvantageous to the queen or herself. Vashj's mind was greatly disturbed by that vague, yet distinct, sense of confusion. When she woke up from this disturbance, it was already too late. Arthas's fierce horizontal slash had arrived. It was a sword momentum that seemed to be able to split the entire world from the horizon, and there was no room to dodge at all. At this critical moment, all Vashj could do was raise all 6 weapons and futilely block in front of her. Bang, 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 bang. 6 consecutive crisp sounds, as well as 2 sounds that sounded like ripping silk, announced the failure of her final struggle. The blood drained from Vashj's face, and her fluttering red hair seemed to have lost its color. Even though she had already done her best to suck in her abdomen, she could not avoid heavy injuries. 6 epic weapons shattered, 2 arms chopped off, and her lower abdomen was directly cut open. This was the result. If she could, Vashti would rather see her intestines and organs spilled all over the ground than see her wounds without a drop of blood. This meant that the power of Frostmourne had already begun to completely invade her body. She was indeed a demigod, but a demigod's body could not be immune to even more powerful soul corrosion. Vashti knew that if she died before the Ice Throne, her soul would not even have the chance to return to planet Azeroth. She would become Arthas's slave like the former dragon aspect, Maligos. Jumping down from the fallen black dragon, Sylvanas' face had already lost all color. It was too tragic. She had originally thought that she, who had the weakest constitution among the 3, would be used by Arthas as a breakthrough point. She had always been on guard, always leaving at least 20% of her wind element to defend against Arthas' grasp of death. If she was forcefully pulled into close combat, she would have lost more than half of the battle. Evidently, her thoughts had been completely seen through and used instead. Arthas didn't plan to be the first to attack her. As long as he crushed Onyxia and Vashti, who had stronger constitutions, Sylvanas would be nothing more than a lamb waiting to be slaughtered in his eyes. Now, Arthas flashed his sinister smile. "Ha! Pitiful female elf. Do you really think that your rage for revenge can burn me, the Lich King? Laughable. Too laughable. Without Duke Marcus, you are nothing." Arthas' ridicule was like the sharpest sword, fiercely gouging into Sylvanas' heart. His revenge was being mocked. The blood of thousands of her compatriots was flowing in vain. Even she herself might very well follow in the footsteps of her compatriots, just like that blood queen Lanais, crawling against her will at the feet of this great enemy. Chapter 1715. To Sylvanas, death was not scary. What was scary was that after death, she would have to serve an enemy whose hands were stained with the blood of her own kind like a slave. Elves were proud. They had a great history that they could be proud of, and a glorious magic civilization. Whether it was the magnificent architecture of Silvery Moon City or the Long Song Forest that allowed elven rangers to enjoy nature and tranquility, they were the greatest inheritance and wealth of the elves. Arthas and his ugly, filthy scourge army that should have been destroyed 1,000,000,000 times had destroyed everything. They had destroyed the glorious inheritance of the elves, trampled on their pride, killed their friends and loved ones, and shamelessly enslaved their souls and bodies. This was a crime that could not be forgiven. The inextinguishable pride in her heart did not allow Sylvanas to make any compromises on the important matter of revenge. However, she saw Lanais, the respected counselor of the past. Now, she served Arthas like a lowly whore. Arthas did not even give her a bone to obtain her loyalty and service. She also saw an Astrian. He could not resist the temptation of eternal life. He first pledged loyalty to Nizul, then rebelled. Then, he joined the Lich King Arthas again, becoming a man who was worse than a dog. Sylvanas could not accept such a thing. However, she knew that if it was her, she would not have fared much better under the endless torture and pressure of her soul. Was she afraid? She was not afraid. She had only made up her mind. If it came to the last moment, she would save the last lightning arrow for herself. That was an arrow that could destroy her body and soul. She already knew that she might not be able to take revenge personally, but at least she would not be the pitiful creature that groveled to serve her enemy. Sylvanas' furious golden eyebrows stood up at the greatest angle. Within her bright and beautiful eyes, it was as if there was a flame, a divine radiance mixed with thunder and lightning that continuously erupted. Compared to the rage and determination in her heart, the elements around her body were unexpectedly calm. Even the most violent lightning power in the natural world was as gentle as water. It quietly rushed over from the void and flowed into her body like rivers flowing into the sea. "Duke, I'm sorry. What a joke, to actually break through at a time like this." It was like a sigh, but also a farewell. The malevolence on Arthas' face faded away and was replaced by a look of admiration. It was because at this moment, Sylvanas had already broken through his limits. This method of imprinting his own mark on every drop of elemental energy signified that Sylvanas had advanced from a bottom-tier demigod to a mid-tier demigod. Unfortunately, in the eyes of Arthes, who stood at the pinnacle of the demigod realm, she was far from enough. Hee. Based on your perseverance and growth, you are qualified to be the second leader of the Calamity Troop. The corners of Arthes's mouth curled up. I haven't forgotten the hatred of the past. Duque stole my woman, broke my arm, and cut off my waist. I can't let this go unavenged. Because this is my dignity as the Lich King. I'm really looking forward to seeing Duque's expression when he sees that all his women have become undying. How terrifying was the all-out attack of a mid-level demigod? This is very difficult to estimate. Arthes was not afraid, but he had to consider the upcoming battle with Duque. It was worth it to be able to turn Duque's arm and lover into his support, and at the same time, attack Duque's spirit. If this was the Arthes before he fell, he might not have bothered to do this. After he killed his father, Tyrenas, and his master, Uther, all the morals and ethics of the human world could no longer be used to restrict his actions. An ice river suddenly exploded under Arthes's feet. With a light tap of his left foot, Arthes's body flew into the air. In mid-air, his beloved horse, Invincible, had already rushed out of the void and caught Arthes in an instant. At this moment, Arthes had already turned back into a standard Death Knight. When he was alive, Invincible was one of the few great warhorses of Lordaeron. After becoming an undead horse, Invincible received shocking enhancements. When it spread its 4 hooves and galloped, it was as fast as lightning. Sylvanas had only drawn his bow halfway, and Arthes was already in front of him. Fast. Too fast. With the unstoppable force of Invincible, a terrifying sword that seemed to be able to split the sky and earth came crashing down. The atmosphere was shaking. The elements were trembling. The space was buzzing. Sylvanas, who did not have time to finish his action, had no choice but to raise Solidar high up. In her hands was a divine artifact bow, not a divine artifact sword. Even though Solidar naturally had close combat attributes, it was a pity that it was only a secondary function. A bow, after all, was still a bow. Sylvanas could already foresee that his extremely precious divine artifact longbow would be destroyed in the next instant. The terrifying Frostman would break through this insignificant resistance and turn her into a corpse in an instant. A walking corpse enslaved by the evil Lich King. At this moment, when time was almost frozen, Sylvanas realized in despair that he could not even shoot himself one last arrow. Everything in front of him was white. Amidst the white frost were the sorrowful wails of millions of wronged souls. After that, it was Arthes's savage and vicious face. It was a critical moment, but at the very end, Sylvanas's mind turned to this sentence. I'm sorry. I was too willful. Priests had a skill called Prayer of Despair. Sylvanas did not believe in it. She used to only believe in herself, but if God gave her a chance to do it all over again, she would choose to believe in Duque. If prayer in despair was useful, then she might as well pray for once. Sylvanas's tears scattered in the air. She used the last of her strength to call out a name, Duque. She did not expect an answer. However, time and time again in this world, there was always one person who would not let her down. That person was her only partner, Duke Marcus. Coming! With this slightly mischievous and slightly smug voice, a hand suddenly reached out from the portal behind Queen Sylvanas and pulled her in. The famous Frostman slashed through the air, and Arthes could not believe her eyes. Behind him and Invincible, a couple appeared in another portal. Looking at the familiar face, Sylvanas could not believe it. Her trembling golden eyebrows betrayed her forced calm. She reached out and caressed Duque's face, asking tentatively, Duque? Chapter 1716. Duque, it's really you? You're here? Sylvanas could not believe her eyes. If I didn't come, you'd all be snatched away by 2 idiots. *CK. I don't want my woman to become a cold corpse. Duque glared at Queen Sylvanas. It was rare for Sylvanas to tremble and shrink back. Her voice was no longer as strong as before. You heard everything? Of course. If I didn't come, would you have sacrificed yourself for your people? Stupid. If Arthas was the kind of opponent that could be destroyed by sacrifice, his grave would have been 3 feet high. Duque cursed fiercely, causing Queen Sylvanas to tremble again and again. Not only that, Duque also curled his lips provocatively at Arthas, who had turned around. I'm sorry I've let you, my people, down? Queen Sylvanas lowered her head, which was always held high. Yes. I'm very disappointed. Your people are also very disappointed. Suddenly, Duque changed the topic. We're not disappointed that you didn't work hard, nor are we disappointed that you're not brave enough. We're disappointed that you can't see the current situation clearly. What era is it now? In the face of such a public enemy, we should naturally gather the strength of the world to fight against him. You can't see the difference in strength between us and the enemy, and you just rushed headfirst into it. That's the most childish heroism. Duque's harsh scolding made Sylvanas dare not even raise her head. Her chin was in the cleavage of her chest, and her head was buried deep in Duque's chest. Biting her delicate red lips, she made a mosquito-like sound. I was wrong, Duque, forgive me, okay? Forgive? Sure. After killing Arthas, I'll ravage you so hard that you can't get out of bed for a month. I'll make sure you're pregnant. When you have children, I'll see if you still dare to act so recklessly. After saying that, Duque's right claw dug deep into Queen Sylvanas' right buttocks, as if he was going to crush that extremely elastic piece of meat. Sylvanas let out a cry of alarm. Her beautiful face and slender neck were covered in an unbearable crimson. She really wanted to resist, but in the face of Duque's domineering declaration, she felt an unprecedented sense of being conquered and sweet. This complicated mood made her forget to struggle. In front of her great enemy, she actually revealed a delicate expression that only a little girl could have. On the other side, Arthas, who had just been fed a mouthful of dog food, could no longer hold it in. She immediately sent a sword gust over. Unfortunately, he was destined to miss. Duque immediately used instant teleportation and took Sylvanas to a different location. Not only did he take away Queen Sylvanas, but he also sent a mental message to Xianxia and Vashj to return to their human forms. A pair of huge hands of magic supported 2 wounded people. Vashj was a little miserable. There was a 10-centimeter long hole on her flat belly, and the Lich King's frost power was constantly invading her soul and body. If not for Duque's arrival, even if she persisted in the battle, she would have been unable to resist the worsening of her injuries and eventually become a servant of the Lich King. Xianxia was in an even worse state. Vashj could still hold on for the time being, but she could not hold on for much longer. Her right wing was almost chopped off. Even in human form, her entire right shoulder was covered in frost. Coupled with the 2 rather serious wounds on her lower abdomen and thigh, even if she returned to Katrana's appearance, her body could not help but shiver from the extreme cold. For a giant dragon with a demigod body, this situation could be said to be rather terrible. A golden figure walked out of the void behind Duque. Archbishop Alonsis Fail. As an important existence that could restrain evil, Duque did not leave him in the magic net. Instead, he had long brought him with him in the form of a soul host. Even if Arthas had the ability to separate Duque from the magic net, Duque would not lose the Archbishop. As soon as Alonso's appeared, he immediately started treating Xianxia. Master! Mount number 1 lowered its head, not daring to look at Duque. Of course, she knew that it was precisely because she had chickened out at the critical moment that caused the chain of collapse. Duque did not even look at her, and directly threw back a sentence, I'll deal with you later. But remember, when facing an opponent that you cannot defeat, betraying your teammates is the same as betraying yourself. The more you chicken out, the faster you die. Yes. Even though Xianxia was afraid, she knew that this time, she had let it go. Woo-woo. At most, she would just have her scalp whipped or something. It was better than being turned into a corpse dragon. Thinking of the ugly corpses of the Calamity Army, the Black Dragon Princess who loved to look good shuddered. Only towards Vashj, Duque revealed a gentle smile. He did not speak, and just nodded. But this silent exchange was already enough to make Vashj, whose brows were scrunched up due to the pain, reveal a flowery smile. A look of affirmation was enough to make all the hard work and pain she had endured become meaningful. 10,000 years ago, she was just a lowly maid that could be casually given away. She had endured the most chaotic darkness. She had suffered the most cruel abuse. In her most painful and helpless moment, it was Duque who taught her the ultimate transformation spell, which allowed her to preserve the last pure land of her spirit when she was on the verge of collapse countless times. After returning to Duque's side, she had always served Duque with a fanatical attitude and did not hesitate to compromise to please every woman around Duque. She was clearly the leader of a clan, a queen. But in order to repay a debt of gratitude, she placed herself very, very low. As smart as she was, of course, she knew that Servanus's method of fighting would not work. She still helped him without any hesitation, even though she was also heavily injured. Now, she felt that her sacrifices and efforts were all worth it. As long as Duque approved of her, it was enough. Vashj's face revealed a martyr's radiance, and she made a sign with her mouth. Duque recognized it. She was saying, "I will always be your Celia." Duque scratched his head. Everyone says that Vashj is sinister and ruthless? Why do I feel that she is silly and cute? Sure enough, circumstances are the biggest factor that changes a person's character. Shaking his head, he stopped thinking about these things. Finally, Duque stood in front of Arthis. The muscles on Arthis's face twitched. A dead person's muscles should have withered and rotted due to the lack of blood circulation. The surging shadow energy replaced the position of blood, providing every cell in Arthis's body with the activity that only belonged to the undead. If she could, Arthis would have liked to chop Duke in half at the first possible moment. Otherwise, he would have been fed a stomach full of dog food, and it was even the harem brand of dog food. Unfortunately, he could not do it. The second Duque appeared, Duque's attack began. Chapter 1717. At first, Arthis thought that Duque would be like Vashj, fighting with him for control of the surrounding frost elements. If that was the case, he would probably laugh in his dreams. Of course not. Arthis had long regarded Duque as the enemy of a lifetime, naturally because of Duque's glorious past and unusual methods. He also thought that Duque was pretending to take care of his woman and secretly controlling the surrounding elements. As soon as Duque opened his mouth, Arthis knew that he was wrong. Whether it is Nazul or Arthis, they have never been peerless experts. Not in the past, not now, and not in the future. If this was the end of the sentence, then it would only be a sentence without any real meaning. The second half of Duque's words caused Arthis' expression to change. Only a Lich King who endlessly absorbs power from his subordinates is a true peerless expert. Almost at the same time as Duque's voice fell, Arthis felt another string in his mind break. Another leader had been defeated? Arthis did not move. Duque had no intention of letting him go. Duque opened his arms, and a huge set of arcane energy was suddenly projected above his head. The first number was 1, separated by a few empty spaces, the second was 9, and after that, the third was more than 10,000, and the fourth went directly to the million level. Apart from the first two sets of numbers, everyone could see that the next two sets of numbers were rapidly counting down. Arthis was not stupid. He immediately understood what these numbers represented. Duque deliberately pointed it out. The Lich King is only a weak existence. Apart from all the connections between you and your subordinates, there are at least 2 digits of existences in the Alliance army that can defeat you. But with so many Undying providing you with soul power, anyone who fights with you will be fighting against a large number of Undying at the same time. At this time, Duque turned back and glanced at Queen Sylvanas. Sylvanas immediately came to a realization. No wonder she could not defeat Arthis no matter how hard she trained, no matter how hard she tried. Fighting the Lich King meant going head-on against the undead army that numbered more than 100 million. As long as he couldn't kill them instantly, the Lich King could heal himself by absorbing the soul power of his subordinates, no matter how heavily injured he was. On the other hand, as long as the entire Calamity army was destroyed, The Lich King would be a piece of meat on the chopping board. He could do whatever he wanted. Servanaz's fair face was flushed with shame. Duque adopted a dignified defensive stance. He used the frost elements in his body to create a solid ball of ice that wrapped around himself. Duque smiled faintly. He did not hide his provocation at all. Therefore, every soldier in the coalition army's fight is meaningful. I don't need to do anything. I just need to hold on until the number and quality of your undyings fall below the critical line. Then I can wait until you weaken. When you are so weak that you can no longer withstand my attacks, that will be my victory. Duque opened more live projections of the various battlefields in the Ice Crown Glacier. In the magic mirror, the coalition army was advancing towards the Ice Crown Fortress in an orderly manner. After entering the territory of the Ice Crown Fortress, the coalition army almost leveled their cannons and used close-range shooting tactics to cover the advance of the infantry and tanks. Almost every 100 meters, they would summon the earth elementals under Archavon to reinforce the ground beneath their feet to prevent the spider demons from digging holes and launching sneak attacks. The logistics team first burned the corpses with flames and sprinkled Naro holy water on them, using a destructive method to cut off the Calamity Army's escape route. They were also destroying Arthas's source of strength. Unless the Calamity Army could obtain corpses faster than the speed at which they were destroyed, Arthas's strength would inevitably decline. What disgusted Arthas was that William seemed to have long known about this secret that only the Lich King knew. After they defeated Lord Malorgar, they directly took away the Shadow Frost fragment from its corpse. That was the mental energy node that he used to control the Calamity Army's subordinates. His control over his subordinates was a typical root-like structure. As the branch leader, he controlled the branch leader, who then controlled the elite subordinates, and the elite subordinates, who then controlled the low-level immortals. Now that William and the rest directly destroyed the branch, Arthas couldn't help but be angry for a while. The most abominable thing was Duque, who used the same powerful mental energy to disrupt Arthas's work of bypassing the destroyed leader and rebuilding the mental domination circuit. This series of actions seemed to have been premeditated by Duque. Actually, he had wronged Duque this time. Duque really didn't know that the Shadow Frost fragment was the key to Arthas's energy supply from the Calamity Army. He told everyone to remember to collect the Shadow Frost fragment in advance because he knew that when all the Shadow Frost fragment was combined, it could form an awesome divine double-handed axe, the Shadow's Sorrow, which was known to be able to slash anyone and anything it saw. Whether it was a misunderstanding or intentional, it was destined that after today, there would only be one of them left. Arthas laughed. Do you really think that all the heroes that I've specially destroyed can all win? As long as any one of them fails, they will become the new pillars of the Calamity Army. By the way, Anastrian has successfully ambushed Naxxramas with the crystal skull that Nazul once used. Even the Red Dragon Queen that you rely on as a backup has been imprisoned by him. Oh? Is that so? Duque was unmoved and said calmly, You just have to pretend to be calm. There's no longer anyone there who can keep Anastrian in check. He will soon kill Gianna and Kale. That's an offer them to me. Do you think that you can have Gianna forever? Before Arthas could finish, Duque interrupted him. Of course, Gianna is mine. Every muscle and every inch of her skin belongs to me. It has nothing to do with you, Arthas. Also, I can make her give birth to children. Can you? With that, Duque glanced at the lower half of Arthas' body with disdain. He thought that after becoming a Lich King, his soul would be completely cold and would no longer have any feelings. Arthas realized that he was wrong, very wrong. It was precisely because he retained the memories of his time as a human that he could not let go of that resentment and hatred. What Duque said was Arthas' eternal pain. Just as he was about to say something, his words were interrupted by Duque again. Do you really think that Fensitter Anastrian has completely lost his own will and will absolutely follow your every order? That cold crystal skull, it's not wrong to call it the skull of the traitor. Chapter 17-18. At this moment, Arthas's expression suddenly changed. No one knew more about that skull than he did. Although that thing could strengthen the mental strength of a normal soul countless times, That was an increase in strength in exchange for endless pain and torture. Nizul was essentially just a cowardly guy. From his experience, he knew that in the face of Kill Jaden's oppression, even if he signed the soul contract, he still did not have the guts to lead the war between the orcs and the Draenei. As a result, his power was stolen by Ghoul Den. He shrank back. When the tribe launched the first and second wars at the Dark Portal, he hid in his old home in the Moonshadow Valley and became an otaku. If it wasn't for the explosion of Draenor, he would not have dared to lead the tribe to attack Azeroth again. When he failed, all he could think of was to escape. However, why did such a cowardly fellow, who had no ambition at all, dare to raise the flag of rebellion against the powerful Burning Legion after Archimonde knelt and knowing that the Legion still had killed Jaden? It was completely inexplicable. Only Arthas, who had fused with Nizul's soul, knew that Nizul was actually tortured by the Ice Skull. That kind of pain and madness completely exceeded the limit that a normal soul could bear. In order to get rid of this pain that seemed to last forever, he did not hesitate to betray the Burning Legion. In fact, when Arthas put on the Lich King's mask and began to fuse with Nizul's soul, the first difficulty was not the difference between their souls, but Arthas had to appease Nizul's unusually sensitive and restless heart because of the excessive injuries and torture, like a child. Now, Arthas twisted Anastrian's head with a strong momentum and replaced it with this ice skull. Of course, this guy's strength was forcibly raised to the demigod level. The continuous terrifying torture could indeed dispel Anastrian's will to resist. However, going too far was as bad as not going far enough. Arthas's method was destined to not gain loyalty, let alone a former king who was originally arrogant and full of rebellious thoughts. He had betrayed the Scourge once, so he could betray the Lich King a second time. With the rapid destruction of the Scourge soldiers, the weakening of the Lich King's power became inevitable. Right now, he was completely relying on the shadow power accumulated in the Icy Throne to pass his days. If they could not withstand this round of attack and turn the powerful invaders led by Duque into immortals, the Calamity Troop would have to stop here. He understood this, and so did Anastrian. Under such circumstances, would this newly promoted demigod Lich still serve the Lich King with all his might? I don't think so. Arthas subconsciously narrowed her eyes. He knew very well that Duque was trying to drive a wedge between him and Anastrian. The problem was that this was an overt plot. Although he knew that Duque was shameless, he could only accept it. He raised his left hand, and his 5 fingers quickly created a violent winter storm. Grim winter swept towards Duque. Clearly, the Lich King was enraged. With the momentum of this storm, let alone a human, even the largest flying battleship in the Alliance would instantly turn into a lump of ice and crash down. Duque followed his heart very well. Yes, following his heart added up to cowardice. With a stomp of his right foot, an octagonal ice fortress that wasn't considered large rose from the ground. It seemed that Duque had built it as easily as building an Eskimo ice hut. This B***starred actually had the mood to summon Sylvanas, who was originally protecting the other 2 women. She pointed at her shoulder. "Come, your man is tired. Give your man a massage." If it was in the past, it would be strange if Queen Sylvanas did not flip the table on the spot. This time, Sylvanas, who knew that she was in the wrong, was like a little wife who had been bullied. She glanced at Arthas in the distance, but still moved her small steps and used the strength of a battering ram to massage someone's back. Stop. Are you trying to murder your husband?" Duque waved ish, and used more magic to stop Arthas's advance as he cursed. Arthas was in no mood to care about Duque at all. A powerful demigod of the same level as him who was deliberately trying to stall for time was also difficult to deal with. After all, he was not a pure magic type. It was impossible for him to completely block Duque's teleportation. While Duque cut off his connection with the Calamity Army one by one, he was also trying hard to find the magic channel of the magic net in the void and find a way to cut it off. This was a classic case of mutual harm. Arthas was also anxious. "Anastrian, how long are you going to stall for? Didn't you report to me that you've already trapped Alexstrasza?" "Sorry, Your Majesty. I've been attacked by Desert's Dream Unstable. The soul connection was quite unstable. Arthis could clearly feel the condition of this powerful and disobedient subordinate. Overall, it was better, but the situation was similar to his. It was also a wonderful state of obtaining an advantage, but it could not be turned into victory. The Sun King was beating up Jaina and Kale, but when he was snatching the magic net, he was strongly disturbed by the Lord of the Emerald Dream. A genuine demigod who was good at spiritual attacks, even long-range attacks that crossed space, could not be ignored. The feeling of wading in a quagmire was terrible. Even if he wanted to blame an Astrian for not doing his part, there was no good reason. That idiot Malygos was finished. This Sun King was the only strong person under him who rarely made a move. The Sun King had also helped him hold off several strong people on the coalition army. Otherwise, if a top person like the Red Dragon Queen attacked Icecrown Fortress, even he would have a headache. Duque clearly had more confidence in the heroes under his command. This was indeed the case. When Arthis spread out his divine sense and focused his attention on the various leaders of Icecrown Fortress, he saw several scenes that made him grit his teeth in anger. In the end, the huge deformed monster's intestines could not withstand the fierce attack of Ashbringer. When Theon patiently accumulated his power of the holy light, he slashed the door-sized sword at the monster for the 10th time, and rotten intestines exploded. Professor Putterseed created a flesh and blood monster that could resist the holy light, but he did not give this monster a soul full of hatred. If it was an evil soul like Arthis or the former Kel, Thazad, it could produce a steady stream of shadow power to better fight Theon. Unfortunately, when Ashbringer cut rotten intestines to the point that it was missing an arm and a leg, the power of rotten intestines was also rapidly declining. In fact, by the 6th strike, the outcome was already decided. Chapter 1719. In front of the frozen throne, Duque was still fighting Arthis on the not-so-big, not-so-small ice platform. The injured Onyxia and Vashch had been sent by Duque to the place where he had just killed Malygos with teleportation. Duque had also solemnly warned the two of them not to touch Malygos' salted fish, corpse. A crazy dragon lich. The lingering sound of its soul might contain unknown destructive power. If you want to become a fool, go ahead and touch it, Duque said. Duque's warning made Onyxia's body tremble. It would probably be very difficult for this guy to regain his courage. Duque had beaten her down with one hand and subdued her with the other. It was hard to expect this guy to run out and take charge in the future. This was karma. Duque was very reassured by Vashch's words. With Queen Sylvie left, Duque had the capital to hold Arthis back. Mages had always been very awesome. The title of the world's son was not something that could be obtained by playing around. Originally, Arthis could crush the 3 demigods with his elemental dominance and almost succeeded in killing 3 demigods. Unfortunately, it was not so easy to succeed against Duque. Knowing that his total magic power was far inferior to Arthis's, Duque did not want to waste magic power with the fool. After all, the magic net was like Wi-Fi. When the signal was bad, it would be stupid to compete with the other's wired network. Duque was just wasting time with the fool. One after another, ice prisms that did not belong to Arthis shot out from the ground to block his way. Arthis could use frost to pollute Duque's frost elements, but if he was slightly negligent, Duque would let Alonso's use divine power to purify the elements around him. As long as it was not poisonous, Duque was almost unafraid of the elements. Riding on the invincible Arthis, he was once again blocked by the iceberg summoned by Duque. When Frostmourne split the iceberg, Arthis could not help but curse, "Are you so sure that those mortal heroes will win?" Yeah. Duque shrugged as he cast the spell. "I'm not bragging, but none of your subordinates can fight." His nonchalant and matter-of-fact disdain nearly caused Arthis' lungs to explode with rage. Seeing Arthis seething with anger, Sylvanas, who had been playing the role of support behind Duque, giggled. Duque turned his head and rolled his eyes. "I suddenly realized that you're quite nasty as well. You actually built your own happiness on the enemy's pain." When Duque said this, Sylvanas was stunned. She didn't know how to respond. What was infuriating was that in the next second, Duque, that bastard, changed his expression as well. But that's what I like about you. Because I'm just this kind of guy. Back then, I snatched Jaina from Earthy's hands, and I felt so good. Duque was pointing fingers at a deer and calling it a horse. It was clearly Jaina who threw herself at him, but he was afraid that Jaina would inherit the fate of being a loner who betrayed her father. She was going to hide on Mars. Oh, Delana. Now that he was talking nonsense, it became that he had taken the initiative to snatch Jaina's dream lover, and he was even showing off as if he had avoided sticking a flower on cow dung. If Earthy's were a ball, she would definitely explode in anger this time. Sylvanas, who was at the back, instinctively wanted to scold Duque, but she suddenly realized that Duque was helping her vent her anger. His words woke her up from her dreams. There were many ways to take revenge. Completely destroying the other party was certainly one way. But what about after revenge? Her eldest sister and third sister had advised her more than once that revenge wasn't urgent. Revenge would eventually be completed, and life had to continue. She could take revenge and live happily. This was the greatest revenge for the enemy, and the best consolation for her dead compatriots. Sylvanas said, I promise you, as long as you destroy Earthy's, I will let go of my bigotry and hatred. These words seemed to be out of the blue, but they were exactly what Duque wanted to hear. That's more like it. Do you want me to cheat for you so that you can reach first? Surpass your eldest sister and third sister? Bastard! Destroy Arthas for me first. In the end, Arthas couldn't hold back the disdain that Duque and his wife had for him. Instead of pressing forward, he walked to the center of the void platform and raised Frostmourne high. Duque narrowed his eyes and said solemnly, Let's retreat to the edge of the floating ice area. Hearing Duque's words, Arthas hesitated for a moment, not knowing if he should use this move. That's right. Only by hiding in the floating ice area on the edge of the platform could he really avoid this killer move. As long as Duque dared to stay in the center, not to mention a demigod like Duque, even if Duque was a true god, he wouldn't be able to survive this move. However, before he made a move, Duque had already seen through everything. Gritting his teeth, Arthas finally stabbed Frostmourne into the center of the platform. Bam! A terrifying wave of ice that seemed to be able to freeze the whole world exploded in all directions with Arthas at the center. Standing in the floating ice area, Duque erected a triangular ice shield in front of him, allowing the ice wave that Arthas created to reach the sky and the ground. When the ice wave hit him, it split in two and swung to the left and right. Under the attack of this extremely cold wave, even though Sylvanas had a demigod body, she still felt the cold invading her body irresistibly. Unconsciously, she hugged Duque tightly. Duque frowned not because of Queen Sylvanas, but because he could tell that the fool was going to go all out. Duque cursed inwardly, You bastards, hurry up and finish this. This was the disadvantage of playing in an away game. Unless Duque was willing to go all out and crash Naxxramas and the Dalajan into the Ice Crown Fortress together, Duque wouldn't be able to get the same amount of magic power and supplies as Arthas. In this world, the greatest thing was called reason. Using a fortress against a fortress, or even a collision, was not something that could be done casually. Duque had taken Naxxramas, and in order to win, Duque could barely do this. But the Dalajan couldn't. Although the Dalajan, which had 2,800 years of heritage, had been torn down by Archimonde once, Duque couldn't reasonably force the Dalajan to crash into the Ice Crown Fortress. Of course, Duque could use his demigod status to force it. Doing so would bury the seeds of conflict. If everyone didn't say it, they would definitely feel uncomfortable, and in turn, it would affect the promotion of the magic net and even the cultivation of talents in the future. Naxxramas was similar. As the Alliance's only purely military aerial fortress, Duque still counted on it to resist the Burning Legion in the future. Chapter 1720. Naxxramas had already suffered enough damage from Frostmourne's wrath. If it collided with it again, this flying fortress that had yet to be repaired would definitely be destroyed. Thus, Duque finally decided to rely on the strength of the mortal heroes to invade the Ice Crown Fortress and cut off the Scourge Army's magic support for Arthas. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Duque was dancing on the edge of a blade. At this point, Duque no longer believed that the goddess of destiny, who he had messed with countless times, would still let fate remain the same. What Duque believed was that this heroic team that had been trained to the point of being extremely elite was the Alliance army that he had painstakingly built to be many times more powerful than it had been in history. At this moment, the allied forces of the Alliance and the Dragon Slumber Shrine were marching rhythmically in all directions around the Ice Crown Fortress. The battle at the front did not stop. The damaged mechanized troops in the middle were being dragged to the rear for repairs, and the injured soldiers were being carried to the rear for treatment in an orderly manner. At the place that had been a battlefield not long ago, the soldiers who had launched the first round of assault had just been replaced. There was no pain or despair on their faces, only confidence and indifference for victory. They followed the military manual that Duque had issued, quietly sipping warm water and eating a little bit of food to replenish their energy in preparation for the second round of battle. In the Ice Crown Fortress, William's team, Magni, and Chandri's, who had long since gotten rid of their opponents, suddenly encountered a large number of Scourge soldiers on the way. What the hell? Weren't there no soldiers just now? Why are there suddenly so many? Magni raised the Balrog hammer and smashed the Scourge soldiers that were charging at him like a game of whack-a-mole. The fire attribute of the Balrog hammer could easily burn those fellows into ashes, and he didn't even need to collect their corpses. This was also because Magni was holding back. Otherwise, his advance would have been several times faster. Idiot, use your stone head to think, Chandri's teased Magni. This adopted daughter of the Whispering Wind family wasn't a gentle elf. An elf that was too gentle wouldn't be able to be an independent general. Oh, what the coincidence! My ancestor was a stone. You said I have a stone brain. That's a compliment to dwarves. Magni was unmoved. He looked like an old man. Actually, she was older than him. Chandri's rolled her eyes. Idiot. They probably didn't want to waste their military strength by not sending out small fries. After all, these fellows aren't even qualified to warm up for us. But now, they're pushing out so many small fries. What do you think they're trying to do? It's just that those who can fight weren't able to hold us back. They're afraid that our hero group will join forces and form a snowball effect. The Dwarf King was never a fool, but he could be a little weird at times. Chandri's figure flashed by quickly. Her moonlight ray easily killed a dozen monsters. Indeed, as soon as they turned a corner, they discovered William and the other two. Great. Varian was the first to wave at them. Is Brawl okay? Magni saw Brawl clutching his abdomen as he followed behind with a pained expression. He didn't participate in the battle. I was heavily injured. I need time to recover. Brawl smiled bitterly. Magni and William looked at each other and made a decision immediately. Valera, follow me. We'll chase after them first, Magni said. General Feathermoon, sorry to trouble you. William stood at the side, looking like he was waiting for them. For the sake of the overall situation, they had to gather their lost comrades as soon as possible. Magni and the blood elf thief Valera would be the first to attack. William wouldn't abandon his brothers, so he stayed behind to take care of Brawl Baremantle until Chandri's finished healing him. Chandri's had no reason to refuse, no matter if it was to save her comrades or to protect her comrades from the hero group. Furthermore, she was the only two priestesses of the moon goddess in the group. Just like how many people would be charmed by Tyrant, who was riding a white tiger and wielding a bow. Many people couldn't tell at first glance that Chandri's was actually a priestess. Gentle white light shone from Chandri's slender fingers. The healing effect of the moon goddess divine spell was far superior to that of a druid spells. It easily healed and regenerated Brawl's organs. Just 3 minutes later, Brawl caught his breath and revealed a relieved expression. William, I'm fine now. You don't have to take care of me. As long as I don't actively participate in the battle, I should be able to recover to about 80% of my strength before the final battle. Chandri's wiped the sweat from her forehead. Let's hurry over. I just received a message from that bastard Marcus. Even though he's fine, he hopes that we can hurry. In the hero group, she was the only one who would call Duque a bastard to his face. This was because she couldn't accept that her beautiful and wholly adoptive mother, Tyrant, had actually been taken away by that bastard Duque. Let's hurry. All right. In fact, the battle of the first 8 bosses in the Ice Crown Fortress had ended almost at the same time. Everyone spent a little more time to gather. In the hall on the 5th floor, almost half of the hero group had gathered. In the 4th boss, Death Messenger Salyafar, Varrock wasn't able to take down his son by himself. Lord Howl took action and dismembered little Salyafar. Yes, in the truest sense of the word. Little Salyafar's limbs and waist were chopped off, leaving behind only his chest, neck, and head. If he was alive, he would have died a long time ago. Unfortunately, he was already dead. Even with such severe injuries, he could still move around like a worm. Looking at his son, who had turned into a monster, Varrock was dejected and silent. Only Grum kept comforting him, saying, "Just kill Arthas. Your son will at least come back." The other, heavily injured, Gavinrad went to cut the rotten noodles while being chased by the ooze monsters. In the end, both his buttocks were bitten off. It looked very similar to the logo of a famous brand like Apple. In the end, Gavinrad only managed to take down the rotten noodles with the help of Theon. However, when he shamelessly asked Chandris for limb regeneration, he was sternly rejected. Strictly speaking, the combination of Elucia and Kalia was due to Kalia's milk to Professor Putterseed. After wielding the divine weapon, Valinor, Kalia's holy light power increased by more than 10 times. Originally, with Elucia's strength, it would have been impossible for her to deal with the strange professor. Instead, Kalia gave Putterseed a holy light treatment. "You're sick. If you're sick, you need to be treated." A ray of holy light and cure disease was cast, and a mysterious chain reaction occurred. Chapter 1721. The overly powerful holy light worked hard to remove the extremely strengthened aberrated cells in the professor's body. After these cells, which were created using the plague as a blueprint, were stimulated, they began to devour the professor's healthy living cells. What was the result? With a whoosh, the originally thin professor swelled up like a balloon. Ah! The professor became a howling beast, his cries echoing throughout the lab. "He looks like he's in pain. What should I do?" Kalia raised Vern in a daze. "Continue. Since the enemy is unhappy, then we have to do it. Isn't that what Duke has been teaching us all this while?" Elucia was the more assertive one. "Yes. Recover, heal, cure, greater heal, under normal circumstances, using holy light to heal an enemy with the shadow attribute was nonsense. It wasn't that holy light couldn't be used on the enemy, but that form of holy light wasn't as effective as a priest's punish. But the reason why a divine artifact was a divine artifact was that it had extraordinary special effects. Veronel was a top-notch divine artifact that could grant life to inorganic objects. Although its effects would definitely be reduced after recasting, its ability to stimulate the growth of life was coincidentally the nemesis of Putricide's howling beast. Not only were the aberrated cells in his body stimulated, but his muscles, which should have been dead and had rotted to his bones, also showed signs of mutation. The cells of 2 different attributes were stimulated, multiplying thousands of times faster. After Kalia cast her 30th spell, bang! The professor exploded. The 2 dainty heroines looked at each other. "Does this count as a victory for us?" Kalia asked in a daze. You can say so." On the 6th floor of the Ice Crown Fortress, Imriel, Vanessa, Lilith, Tyrant, and Riadaline were battling the bloody Queen Lanais. At the start, Imriel was the first to be hit. Perhaps she wasn't strong enough to pose a threat to Lanais, but the bloody queen actually bestowed her with a blood queen's essence. Her hooves were instantly pumped up. She swung her hammer like a windmill, hitting the bloody queen's head until it bled. Even so, Lanais was not annoyed. Instead, she looked at the hoof, liking it even more. Then Hoof felt terrible. "How strange, I suddenly crave fresh blood. Can one of you give me a bite?" The Hoof's words were naturally treated as a lunatic. Not only was no one willing to pay attention to her, but everyone subconsciously distanced themselves from her. In the end, a negative mind control effect called uncontrollable frenzy broke out. Originally, The hoof should have lost its mind and become brainless, allowing itself to be controlled by the Blood Queen. As the first disciple appointed by the prophet Willin after his death, Imriel's willpower was rare in the world. His willpower was unparalleled when it came to protecting his clansmen against evil. As a hoof who had gone through countless hardships, he managed to forcefully break free from uncontrollable frenzy with his own willpower. When she recovered in the short span of a second, the Blood Queen was stunned and suffered a few more attacks for no reason. Everyone be careful. She can turn people into vampires. If you don't drink blood, you'll be under her control. But if you drink blood, it seems that you'll pass on the vampire ability to the other party. She might bite someone else later. The hoof was unusually smart. Almost immediately, she revealed the truth of the matter. Turning the opponent into a vampire and having a mental breakdown if he didn't drink blood was the Blood Queen's core skill. If this skill was broken, how could she fight? Then, the hoof's cleverness was ruined. Since Imriel isn't afraid of being controlled, why don't we all bite Imriel after we get hit? Vanessa immediately thought of a countermeasure. The hoof's face fell and she trembled. No way. For victory. This is a must. Vanessa's expression was serious and brooked no refusal. Then, I've been hit, Imriel, Laedeline shouted. This time, it was her arm that was bitten. It's me this time. Hoof, come here, Vanessa shouted. Can I not come? A thief was resolute. This time, it was her shoulder that was bitten. In a tense situation, those who hadn't become vampires before would not have any experience. Most of them were ruthless. After a few rounds, the hoof was traumatized by the bite. This fellow actually decisively changed into a more sturdy set of armor just before the battle. It was Tyron's turn. The hoof shook her hand and shook her head. Although the chicken blood from the Blood Queen had greatly increased her attack power, it was still too painful to be bitten every time. This time, the hoof decisively came to a conclusion. Your Excellency Whisperwind can bite others. Isn't it better to increase everyone's attack power? Please forgive me for refusing. And you won't have anywhere else to bite. The hoof wagged her tail proudly. In her glee, she forgot that her blue tail was only protected by two pitiful metal rings. The agile Tyron pounced forward and bit Adreniai's tail. No, it's too sensitive there, I will. It was a sorrowful cry mixed with a special meaning. Then, perhaps out of mischief, every heroine that was hit by the Blood Queen's essence chose to bite Imriel's tail when they had no choice but to bite someone. 2 minutes later, the Blood Queen was defeated. Everyone was very happy. Only a sobbing hoof was left, sitting on the ground as if she had been toyed with. Sob, 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 I can't get married anymore. At this moment, in front of the ice throne, Arthas's expression was even worse. Half of the scourge leaders he had carefully selected had fallen, leaving only the unreliable Anastrian in a stalemate and a green dragon dream treader, Velisria. This green dragon was not a member of the Scourge army. She was just a green dragon that had been captured by the Scourge army. She was trapped in the Frostwing Hall of Icecrown Fortress, unable to move. In order to save the Dreamwalker, the Alliance's heroes only needed to heal her from paralysis to full health under the obstruction of the Scourge soldiers. Then, everything would be fine. It was not an exaggeration to say that all obstacles on Arthas's path to destruction had been cleared. Arthas had just used Frostmourn's Fury, but it did not hurt Duque at all. Admittedly, the overall power of this level of ultimate skill was quite shocking. If it was used to attack a large fortress like Naxxramas, it would definitely be able to take it all. But as an attack against a single target, this kind of explosive attack with an area of effect did not have enough energy density. Chapter 1722. In fact, Arthas was already very careful, trying hard to focus on the direction of Frostmourn's Fury. His helplessness lay in the fact that this move was formed by the negative energy generated by the anger and wails of billions of wronged souls. The anger of the souls was always varied, some high and some low. Even as a Lich King, it was difficult for him to perfectly integrate the negative energy generated by billions of wills. This made it exponentially more difficult to control this ultimate move. At most, he could decide the general direction of the pour, but he couldn't decide the energy density of this move. Duque, who had already studied and analyzed this move thoroughly, seized the opportunity. He first used True Mirror Image to trick Arthas into attacking the south, and then he shamelessly used Atish as support to forcibly teleport Queen Sylvanas to the north. Because it was a full-range attack, Duque still had to take some of the power of the fury of the wronged souls. But compared to taking it all in from the front, the pressure that Duque, who was on his back, was on the same level as an itch. Queen Sylvanas lay on Duque's back and giggled, which was rare. Duque, I find that I love you more and more. I love the way you make Arthas gnash her teeth in frustration, yet there's nothing she can do about it. Duque bared his teeth and thought to himself, I didn't expect that such a stubborn person like Queen Sylvanas would one day become a bystander who only knows how to cheer 666. Did I lead her astray? However, at this moment, Duque was simply a model of a righteous hero. On the other hand, Arthas's white hair looked extremely messy. It just happened to confirm the saying, a defeated army is like a collapsed mountain, and there is no way out. After withstanding this ultimate move, Duque pointed at Arthas with the head of his drumstick. Arthas, you're finished. Arthas didn't need Duque's reminder to know that things were not good. With the fall of all the leaders under him, the Calamity Army, which was a towering tree, had most of its roots cut off. Of course, he had been trying to repair the roots since just now. What he did was no different from patching. If it was just 1 or 2 holes, he might be able to fix it. However, the Calamity Army was already a basket full of holes. How could it be mended? In his perception, the number of soldiers of the Calamity Troop was still dropping like a cliff. At this moment, the monitor above Duque's head clearly indicated that the total number of Doomsday Troop soldiers had fallen below 100,000. The hateful Allied forces had all become skilled in dealing with the Undying. Not to mention the Calamity Army that had lost their unified command and only had their instincts left. Even if the Calamity Army had a commander, they would still launch tactics such as decapitation tactics or infantry cannons to advance step by step to weaken the Calamity Army. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he had to admit that there was no way to fight this battle. However, I'm finished? But I'm not done yet. Arthas suddenly perked up, as though she had been injected with some kind of expired chicken blood. She didn't know if it had any effect, but in any case, her aura had risen. He let out a heroic roar, his white eyes turning bloodshot because of the surging shadow energy. As long as I kill you, I will kill you. That's right. As long as I kill you, Duke Marcus, I will be able to turn the tables. Faced with Arthas's roar, Duque rubbed his eyebrows in an extremely pretentious manner. Have I ever told you that the top 10 misconceptions in life is, I can kill you? Pfft. Obviously, Duque's words were all unreliable and venomous, but in the ears of Queen Sylvanas, it became a famous saying. Not only was it full of domineering, but it was also very satisfying. Queen Sylvanas once again burst out laughing without any restraint. This was not the end. Duque shrugged and looked forgetful. I forgot that you are not a human anymore. Perhaps you can make an exception? An exception? I don't need an exception. Arthas was interrupted halfway through her sentence. Do you think you still have an Astrian? Duque's face was full of mockery. Arthas's heart turned cold. He also knew that his mentality was very much like that of a gambler. He knew that betting was not reliable, but he always deluded himself into thinking that he could turn the tables. Who knew that he would lose everything? This time, even Queen Sylvanas spoke, her mockery even more obvious. Don't be silly. We know an Astrian better than you do. He will only stand on the side of the winner. When Sylvanas said this, even Duque felt that fate was really strange. Ever since he had transmigrated, many people who should have died in history had survived under his influence. Although not all of them were very happy, at least they had a much better ending than the original bitter ones. However, there was an exception like an Astrian. Originally, in history he had led all the members of the Silver Moon Council to fight against Arthas in the third battle of the Dark Portal, and in the end, all of them died in battle. He and the council had all kinds of arrogant and even corrupt lifestyles. But at the last moment he did not escape, did not abandon his people, and could be considered to have fulfilled his duty and died for his country. The Sun King might not be considered a hero, but he should at least be a character with a neutral rating. However, such a character, perhaps provoked by Duque's abduction of the Windrunner family, was forcibly turned into a villain. Queen Sylvanas was right. In this life, an Astrian could voluntarily become a lich to protect himself when the Scourge army was strong, and would betray the Lich King and become the leader of the Forgotten when the Lich King declined. He would definitely not mind betraying the Scourge army again. Moreover, this time he had a very good excuse. At the same time, in the teleportation hall of Naxxramas, a Nastrian knelt in front of the Red Dragon Queen who had broken out of the cage. "Please forgive me, the sinful me. My soul was forcibly controlled by the will of the Lich King. I can't control myself. Please grant me destruction. Hurry. Otherwise, I'm afraid I can no longer control myself and will hurt you. The Alliance is the best ally of the Horde." Jaina's eyes were full of contempt. She did not believe a word of the Sun King's words. Beside her, Kale, was silent, but his tightly clenched fists betrayed the excitement and anger in his heart. Kale, was never a fool, and he instantly understood why. Because of this, he felt even more humiliated. Again. If Jaina was in charge at this moment, and she had the ability, she would definitely destroy the Sun King on the spot. Unfortunately, the person in charge here was Alexstrasza, one of the most important existences in the Alliance army. And in terms of alignment, she was definitely in the good lawful alignment. Chapter 1723. As the head of the dragon aspects that guarded planet Azeroth, Alexstrasza was particular about rules and responsibilities. Even though her expression was not much better, she still chose to accept a Nastrian's surrender. It's always a good thing that you can control yourself and wake up again. But to prevent you from causing damage, I'll lock you up before I defeat the Lich King. Sinner and Nastrian Sunstrider, no objections. The Sun King bowed his unusually eye-catching ice crystal head deeply. With a thought from the Red Dragon Queen, dozens of green vines grew out of the void and bound the Sun King tightly like shackles. On the other side, a small teleportation door suddenly opened in the void, and a green dragon scale flew out, landed on his forehead, and stuck to it. That was Izra's dragon scale to suppress his mental strength that was likely to go berserk. "Leave him to me for the time being." Izra's soft female voice came from the void. The Red Dragon Queen decided. Just as the Sun King was about to be dragged into the prison of the Emerald Dream, the Sun King was shocked to find that his son had walked in front of him. He raised his head in a daze. From his son's fiery red boots, to the familiar gold-lined red robe, and then to the familiar yet unfamiliar face, the Sun King suddenly trembled. Even Jaina looked at Kale, curiously. Who was usually gentle and elegant, roared angrily, "An Astrian, you are the common shame of the High Elves and the Blood Elves. You are also my shame. You don't deserve the great surname, Sunstrider. But in the name of the current head of the Sunstrider family, I announce that you have been stripped of the title, Sunstrider. Are you convinced?" This scene made Jaina so happy that she was dancing and applauding. Relief. Too much relief. Anyone with a brain would know that a Nastrian had once again become an opportunist. If the Scourge leader in the Ice Crown Fortress were to kill the members of the Alliance hero group, it would snowball. No matter what, this guy would kill Jaina, Kale, and the others, using more heads as a gift to the Lich King. It was a pity that the Alliance hero squad was too strong. Not only had none of them died in battle, but they had even managed to annihilate almost all of Arthesa's subordinates. After failing to steal the weave, a Nastrian pretended to be entangled by Izra and surrendered when the opportunity presented itself. He was shameless, but Kale, wasn't polite either. If it had been any other time, a Nastrian could have pretended to be the leader of the tribe and ignored Kale, It just so happened that Kale, had intercepted him at this critical juncture, which made him very uncomfortable. Now that he had been labeled as a capricious person, if he didn't tuck his tail between his legs, He wouldn't be able to cry even if Kale, that's killed him now. With all of his power sealed, he was now no different from the weakest skeleton soldier. His entire body was trembling, but he couldn't find any reason to retort. I was ambushed by the Lich King Arthas, and then my mind was forcibly controlled. I am your father. Before he could finish, Kale that's interrupted him coldly and sternly. Shut up. I, Kale's, once had a father, but my father betrayed his people and his son, and despicably chose to end his own life. From that moment on, I no longer had a father. The one standing in front of me is just a despicable lich with the same name. Finally, I'll ask you one more time, if I strip you of the surname, Sunstrider, are you willing? Anastrian said the word, I, 3 times in a row, but he couldn't continue. The surname Sunstrider was too important. If he kept it, he might be able to use this name to tempt powerful magic elves who were at the end of their lives to be of use to him. He really couldn't bear to give it up. Kale that sneered. You can't bear to? Then, in the name of the patriarch of the Sunstrider family, I'll grant you, an existence who has insulted the name of the Sunstrider, complete destruction. With that, Kale that's really did accumulate a basin-sized fireball in his hand. Alexstrasza, who was next to him, wanted to stop him, but she just raised her hand and put it down again. She was the guardian of the rules. Since the rules did not allow her to reject the Sun King's surrender, she also had no reason to refuse Kale that's execution of the family law. As long as Anastrian was still in the Sunstrider family, Kale that's had the right to kill him. In the end, this was just a means to force him to leave. Seeing that the Red Dragon sister next to him had no intention of interfering, Anastrian finally gave up. From today onwards, I'm just Anastrian. The voice of his soul was full of coldness and unconcealable hatred. He even hated his own son. Kale that's flicked his sleeves and left. In the end, a sentence was cast from the fiery red back. I will inform all the leaders of the tribe of this decision as the Dalajan Kirin Tor chairman. If the Sun King still had lungs to use, his lungs would have expanded rapidly and he would have exploded on the spot. However, he could not do anything because among the back that his son had left him, there was an even more majestic and insurmountable blue back, the back of Duke Marcus. As long as Duque supported Kael'thas, he could not do anything at all. As his whole body trembled, he was slowly submerged by the green liquid from the Emerald Dream. On the void platform of the Ice Throne, Duque received a telepathic message from Alexstrasza. Sorry, I was unexpectedly entangled by that guy. Now that it's settled, do you need help on your side? I don't think so. Besides, my people still have a grudge with Arthas to settle, Duque replied calmly. Really? Free work. The Red Dragon sister had a hidden meaning in her words. A Lich King who has lost his subordinates is like a grasshopper without legs. He won't be able to jump around for long. Aren't you just thinking about snacks? I won't give you less. Of course, if it doesn't work, I'll call for help. Duque laughed. The Red Dragon sister, who had her thoughts seen through, blushed and shamelessly said, I remember. I want snacks. Different types, at least 100 types. If they're not delicious, I won't accept them. All right. Duque turned off the telepathic communication and looked at Arthas, who had a very bad expression. I think these people will be very eager to see you. Duque raised his hand and activated the space-breaking power of Itish. A few figures that Arthas was familiar with stepped out of the portal. Chapter 1724. Gavin Rad Misfortune. Other than Uther, the other 4 of the 5 Silver Sages were actually half of Arthesa's master. In this life, during Arthesa's childhood, the 5 sages basically taught him with the strictest attitude. Only Gavin Rad, the unreliable general of Stormwind, appeared strict on the surface, but secretly encouraged him to push his own maid. It could be said that Gavin Rad was one of the few places that he had a safe haven in his childhood. Tyrion Fordring, another of the 5 Silver Sages. In a sense, he was very similar to Uther. If Uther was a perfect role model, then he was the symbol of excessive tolerance. Before he disappeared with Karazhan, he was tolerant and compassionate towards many people, even opposing the enslavement of the orcs. If these two people, who were both teachers and friends, made Arthas feel uncomfortable, then the next person was the one that Arthas did not want to meet at all. Queen Kalia Menethil, the most gentle and kind sister to him. During his harsh and difficult childhood, she was the only safe haven for his soul, the one and only salvation. When faced with his father, Tyrrhenus, who had always treated him rudely, he did not hesitate to stab his sword into his chest. If it was Kalia standing in front of him at that time, not to mention hesitating, he was afraid that he would have knelt on the spot and begged for his sister's forgiveness. After all, the other reason he hated his father in this life was because his father forced his sister to die. Who knew that his sister did not die? In order to escape his father's persecution, she faked her death with Duque's help and ran around the world. When he killed his father and master, his sister suddenly came out and announced that his self-proclaimed title of king was invalid, and she became the queen of Lordaeron. This result at least made him lose half of the reason he had to kill his father. Everything he did after that was more like a mistake on top of a mistake, and he had no choice but to go all the way. Now that he saw his sister, Arthas felt very conflicted. I should have sent people to capture her, and then let you kill her yourself. The one who spoke was the other me in Arthas's soul. This me, of course, was Nizul. Almost as soon as Kalia appeared, Arthas felt that the two souls that had merged perfectly in his body were showing signs of splitting again. Another voice in his heart immediately warned him sternly, "Idiot! Don't be distracted. You can no longer go back. You are no longer Korea's naive brother. You've already fallen. You've killed your father, your master, and the thousands of soldiers and civilians of the Rotterdam kingdom. Do you think you can return to your past glory? You are a demon king whose hands are stained with the blood of humans. Yeah, there's no going back," Arthas told herself. Ever since his sister had disappeared 5 years ago at the Door of Darkness, it had been 21 years since he had last seen her. Kalia was still that elegant and peerless sister. Of course, he knew that Duque had given his sister eternal life and youth. That pure beauty was forever fixed at the age of 16, the age when his sister was the most beautiful. Time and age had lost all meaning to his beloved sister. Kalia, who was wearing a priest's robe, saw Arthas take off his helmet. Looking at that familiar yet strange face, the thousands of words in her heart were all stuck in her throat. Her mouth squirmed for a long time, but she couldn't say a single word. Behind Kalia, even more Alliance heroes stepped out of the portal. Feeling the atmosphere, everyone silently stood to the side, leaving time for this noble and fateful pair of siblings. After a long, long time, Kalia finally raised her head. The corners of her eyes were already full of tears. "Arthas, are you doing well?" It sounded a bit nonsensical, but this was the condensation of a sister's more than 20 years of longing for her brother. It had nothing to do with identity, status, or life and death. This was the purest familial love. Inside the Lich King's body, another voice that was exactly the same as Arthas screamed, "Don't answer. You will be weak." Arthas raised his head. "I'm not doing well. Not good at all. And I think today is the day of my destruction." In just 3 short sentences, he expressed his sorrow. He poured out the entanglement, depression, and pain of a lost soul. In his body, the voice had already begun to change. It was no longer like Arthas. It began to change back to Nizul's voice. "It's over. Everything is over. Arthas, you idiot." Idiot? Maybe. If I wasn't so stupid, I might have been able to see through Nizul's plot. Perhaps I wouldn't have fallen. Perhaps today, I would be standing in front of you with a glorious identity and crusade against the Lich King, Nizul. Arthas said this openly. In the ears of the Alliance's powerhouses, it was a bit confusing. But he was confessing, and also saying it for Nizul to hear. From the beginning to the end, his fall was not voluntary. He fell into the trap set by Nizul and Kel, Thuzad. That was why he fell step by step. At this moment, Arthas seemed to see a paladin in golden armor standing beside his sister. The paladin was young and handsome. He had the same charming blonde hair as his sister, and a handsome face that was popular with thousands of girls. He was the glory of Lordaeron, the future of his motherland. Idiot. You think too much. If you don't kill Tirinas, you will never be able to see the light of day. The soul that had begun to split into Nazul sharply mocked Arthas' soul. This time, even the Alliance's heroes heard the strange voice that floated out from the Lich King's body. Tyrion and Gavin Rad, the two old men who had been active on the battlefield since World War II, recognized it immediately. Nazul's voice. That's right. Everyone was shocked. On the other side, Arthas did not feel anything from Nazul's words. Is that so? Maybe. Kalia moved. Unknowingly, tears had already flowed down her beautiful face like a broken dam. She slowly walked to Duque's side and nestled against Duque's chest. Arthas, it's not too late. The Alliance has now accepted the Death Knights. Not long ago, Darian Mograine and his Black Blade Knights were officially recognized as legal in the Alliance. Kalia turned her head and looked at Duque. Duque, if Arthas surrenders, can you pardon him? Kalia's words caused a commotion among the Alliance's leaders. Pardon? What kind of joke was that? During the 15 years of the Dark Portal, the Scourge army had ravaged the entire Lordaeron continent, sweeping through many kingdoms including Lordaeron, Cuel Salis, Stromgarde, and many others. They had killed so many kings, slaughtered millions of civilians, and dug up the ancestral graves of countless families. If Arthas, the main culprit, could be forgiven, then. Chapter 1725. Without waiting for Duque to reply, Arthas suddenly shouted, "Enough! Are you kidding me? I am the Lich King, Arthas. Arthas, the King of Immortality who rules over this land." Kalia's delicate body suddenly stiffened. She also realized that she had gone too far. If she really insisted on initiating this motion at the throne meeting, it would only make things difficult for Duque and her sisters. She knew that she was not suited to be a queen. She was always more emotional than rational, and would not even use any imperial techniques in order to control her subjects. In a sense, Kalia, who was inclined to rule by doing nothing, was more like Lordaeron's mascot. If not for the fact that her man was Duque, that there were serious foreign enemies in the world, that the military was protected by Theon, Alexandros, and the others, and that the economic lifeline was controlled by the Marcus family, Alterac, and Cultiras, she would have been overthrown by ambitious people long ago. Arthas's firm refusal actually helped her, and also prevented Duque from being embarrassed. Duque noticed that Arthas did not even mention his surname, Menethil. Once, when he occupied Lordaeron, he had given himself this surname, Boo-hoo. Boo. Kalia could not hold it in any longer, and cried loudly on Duque's chest. "What are you crying for?" Arthas's stern voice caused Kalia to stop crying. "Do you think that you've already won? Enough with the jokes. You are facing the Lich King who has swept the entire world with his undead army. Do you really think that I am the kind of enemy that can be easily defeated by an armed parade?" Changing the topic, Arthas proudly raised his head and pointed his nostrils at the crowd. "Or rather, you should cherish the last of your lives. You will soon crawl at my feet and become the servants of me, the greatest existence in the world, the Lich King Arthas." Ha! He was clearly laughing wildly, but everyone felt as if he was crying. The one who was the most shocked was Kalia, because in her spiritual sea she heard her little brother's illusory words. "Sister, if I perish, you will be able to save me. Please have a child with Duque, with Menethil as their surname." Kalia almost suspected that her ears were playing tricks on her. She suddenly turned her head and saw the deep sorrow in Arthas' eyes. She finally confirmed that these were Arthas' last words. He suddenly realized that the name of the rune sword in Arthas's hand was very similar to this scene. He had fallen into depravity because of the wrong turn of fate. Amidst the fluttering frost, there stood the sorrowful figure of a king. Frostmourne. Duque hadn't said a word since Kalia came in. Although letting Kalia appear and strike a blow to Arthas's morale was the most important part of Duque's plan, for some reason, Duque still felt that he was a little despicable. Even so, if Duque could do it all over again, he would still make the same choice. Too much blood had been shed from the living. It wasn't just the sacrifices of the Allied forces, but also the logistics. Since the beginning of the Molten Core, they had fought one battle after another. Although the people didn't complain, they silently endured everything. As the supreme leader of the Alliance, Duque knew very well that the Alliance had already overdrawn its economy, people's livelihood, and precious resources. Everything had to be settled as soon as possible. In the face of right and wrong, the sibling relationship between Arthas and Kalia could only become a sacrifice. Since there was no turning back, he would let it enter the end as soon as possible. In the original history, it was because Kalia had gone into hiding that Arthas became the perfect and cold undead king. Until the end, Arthas in this life was definitely weaker than in the original history. This was because from the moment he became a Death Knight, he had been constantly blocked by Duque. Failure after failure had made his heart, which should have been firm and strong, sensitive and fragile. Kalia's appearance caused him, who was at the end of his rope, to plummet even further. In Duque's spirit vision, the originally harmonious and unified souls had split again. This was no different from two half-baked Lich Kings who were incompatible with each other and had no choice but to use the same body. If they could win like this, there would be no justice, so there was no chance for Alexstrasza to appear at all. Not to mention Duque. At this moment, every hero on the Alliance's side had noticed that the Lich King's momentum and strength had both plummeted. They couldn't help but marvel at Duque's strategy. Originally, this would at least be an evenly matched, fierce battle. Now it seemed that this was just an inevitable process. Duque, Kalia, and Arthas were all silent. After a long time, Theon and Gavin Rad finally stood up together, the two of them echoing each other. His Majesty Menethil? Commander Marcus? Arthas? Do you have anything else to say? If not, we want to help Uther, and collect a debt for the billions of souls who died at the hands of the Scourge army, a combination of Ashbringer and Thunder's Fury, blessed sword of the Windseeker, was already dazzling enough. At this time, the third wielder of the divine weapon joined the ranks. Kalia, who was covered in tears, wiped her face with Duque's sleeve, resolutely held Veronal, and walked behind the two burly paladins. Theon, Gavin Rad, please allow me to participate in the final crusade against my fallen younger brother as Kalia, Kalia said firmly. Welcome, Lady Kalia. This had nothing to do with the country, this was purely a private battle. Sorry to disturb you, please count us in. Servanas held Solidar, Wrath of the Stars, in his hand and walked up to Kalia's side with large strides. The radiance of the four divine weapons almost blinded Arthas's eyes. Behind Queen Say, Riadaline, Hadron, Lilith, and the other elves all stepped forward. Daneth Trollbane stood silently beside Tyrion, a two-handed greatsword in his hand. Darian Mograine stood beside Gavin Rad. At this time, the portal opened again, and Jaina and Kale, rushed over and silently joined the ranks. In the end, Duque held Atish, legendary staff of the Protector, and walked into the middle of the crowd. Arthas finally began to laugh maniacally once everyone had regained their footing. He pulled out Frostmourne and acted like a madman. Ha, ha, am I really that unpopular with people? So many powerful beings want to see me destroyed? Ha, very good. Then come, let's see if you will completely destroy me, or if I will enslave all of you. Chapter 1726. Idiot. Idiot. Brainless. In Arthas's spiritual world, Ner'zhul's soul was cursing non-stop. If you really want to completely destroy yourself, you can continue to expand the differences between our souls, Arthas retorted calmly. Ner'zhul did not say anything else. He used to be very afraid of death. After death, he was afraid of suffering, and he was even more afraid of having his soul completely destroyed. At this time, his weakness that reached the deepest part of his soul was undoubtedly revealed. Arthas's words had stopped him. Ner'zhul even suspected that his choice to fuse with Arthas was the biggest mistake in itself. The souls of the two of them had almost completely opposite personalities. It was very likely because he was weak and old that Nazul looked forward to the young, powerful, brave, and full of drive Arthas. If they could reach a consensus, their personalities would indeed complement each other perfectly. Unfortunately, it was all too late now. Arthas had already begun to reject Nazul's soul. That was why Nazul was called to fill the pot. How could he fill the pot? Even so, Nazul still harbored a tiny bit of hope and hoped that the allied army would make a mistake. Damn you, Anastrian. If only I still had that crystal skull. Although I hate that thing, it's really troublesome without it now. Nazul continued to pour out his grievances. Anastrian? Ha! Don't think that the old man's fate will be much better than ours. Believe me, Duque must have deliberately kept him. Nazul did not speak again and only sneered coldly. At this time, the battle between the Lich King and the allied army had already begun. Arthas summoned a large group of aberration beasts. These monsters looked a little like octopuses, but their bodies were covered with open mouths. Ladra stomped her hooves and rushed out. Today's main characters are not us, Thread whispered to Imriel. Her hooves would occasionally lose tendons, but she was not a fool. She waved her warhammer and smashed it on the aberration beasts. A total of 5 Wagri shadow guards flew out. These undead creatures wore Valkyrie armor and had a pair of soul wings. As soon as they appeared, they were met with a head-on attack from Tyrant and Chandris. Moonlight rays crossed the void and directly shone on their bodies. Every spot of light made them feel as if they were being burned by lasers. Under the bombardment of the divine spells of the moon goddess cast by the 2 priests, Wagri was suffering unspeakably. Arthas was also suffering unspeakably. Tyrion Fordring raised Ashbringer high and took the lead in attacking. Unlike the original history, Old Mograine did not die, and Ashbringer did not become Fallen Ashbringer. In the entire Silver Hand and even the entire human world, Ashbringer now represented the paladin's firm belief, the kind that would rather break than bend. Looking at this gigantic holy sword, everyone felt as though they were looking at a shining flag of indestructibility. The old man who had experienced the 3rd battle of the Dark Portal had witnessed this holy sword that had created countless glorious achievements. Along the way, Old Mograine had used it to break through the enemy's encirclement. Now that the sacred sword was in Theon's hands, the one and only remaining holy knight of the 1st generation was fulfilling his vow to turn his enemies into ashes. He continued to fight bloody battles, embarking on the same glorious path as his former master. It represented humanity's most beautiful soul and praised the greatness and holiness of the holy light. The sacred sword's enemy was only evil. Evil was not eliminated, so the sacred sword had never been sheathed. If it was one-on-one, Arthas had 1,000 ways to kill Theon. With Gavinrad, who was wielding the wind sword, Arthas felt a little strained. With Servanas and a large group of people coming in for the kill, Arthas was really a little flustered. Just like the Calamity Army, they always liked to win with numbers. This time, it was the human-led hero group's turn to abuse him, and they also won with numbers. There seemed to be a lot of bright lights in the deep void around them. From afar, it was very beautiful. A huge invisible hand was controlling them. It was like a brush in the long river of history, drawing a road that no one had ever seen before. Without this hand, it was likely that the world would become a dead world with only the undead. However, it was this hand that forced a civilization that should have fallen into darkness from the deep and boundless abyss, turning the world around and returning to the right path. Duque did not attack. For Arthas, he was more terrifying than any attacker. Under his spell, the void platform of the ice throne seemed to become a painting that shone with a mottled and mysterious light. Only the people involved knew that in this seemingly harmless light, Duque was using magic to cut off the future that should have belonged to Arthas. One by one, Duque silently cut off the energy connection between Arthas and the remaining Calamity Army. With Arthas's meticulousness, he definitely would not pile all the undead in the Ice Crown Glacier. Only the main force of the Calamity Army was here. In some desolate corner of the continent of Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdom, there must be a large number of the undead. In the original plan, if things went wrong, Arthas could use these undead like batteries, or he could use them as the seeds of the Calamity Army's comeback. What Duque was digging up now was the root of the Calamity Army. After all, Arthas was now protecting the Ice Crown Fortress with his domain open. Once he withdrew his domain, the Ice Crown Fortress would immediately be bombarded by nearly 10,000 heavy cannons. Chapter 1727. With one slap, Gavin Rad fell to the ground. #@+. Kidney Knights had thick skin and flesh, not to mention a legendary hero. Apart from the wind sword, Gavin Rad had the best epic equipment, so he wouldn't kneel. At the last moment, he even directly activated the Holy Shield technique, but he was slapped into the snow. That was so embarrassing. Bad hand not only flattened Gavin Rad, but it also grabbed Theon with one hand. Theon gave himself a protection blessing, which allowed the target to resist the most powerful physical attacks for a short period of time. The target was basically immune to physical attacks, and during this period, the target could not attack anyone. Of course, if Arthas directly used a divine weapon like Frostmourne, it would be a different story. Not being able to use physical attacks didn't mean that he couldn't attack. Theon grabbed the hilt of his sword and stabbed Ashbringer into the ground with one hand. In the next moment, Arthas saw the dazzling divine golden flame pouring down from the sky. One curtain, two curtains, golden flames poured down like a waterfall. Spreading along the waterfall were holy flames that scorched the ground. The Alliance heroes didn't feel anything. The mutant beasts that were harder than tires squeaked as if they were being burned. It had to be said that the mutant beasts developed by the Calamity Army had terrifying defense and vitality. Ashbringer's golden flames weren't able to burn them to death, but as more paladins and priests rushed forward to finish them off, these monsters could only scream and turn into something that was either charred or sticky, dying in the end. However, Arthas seized the opportunity and charged at Duque. Riding on Invincible, Arthas arrived almost instantly on this small platform. Don't even think about going over. Two huge dwarves blocked the way. The Iron Furnace fort had never been directly attacked by the Calamity Army, so he didn't have the nerve to fight for the position of main attacker with the other victims. This didn't mean that Magni and the Muradin brothers would abandon their duties. They roared angrily, and they were also burning with a raging battle intent. Their voices actually caused the space around them to tremble. Tee. Arthas spat. There were just too many Alliance experts. After Anastrian had pledged his allegiance for the second time, Arthas found out how Duke had managed to train so many leaders of the Alliance from being ordinary heroes, all the way until they were all legendary tier heroes. Arthas held onto Invincible's reins with her left hand, and her beloved horse made an unscientific 90-degree turn as it galloped forward at high speed, dodging Magna's giant Balrog hammer. At the same time, he swung his sword. Tormented! The surging shadow power shot towards Magni in a conical shape. Even with his deity's descent state, he was not immune to this kind of high-level mystery. Originally, Magni still had the chance to add another hammer strike to stop Arthas. Arthas issued a command through her divine sense, and several tens of massive devil beasts appeared out of thin air before pouncing toward Magna. Even if the blazing flaming devil hammer was right in front of them, they would not stop. This scene was extremely heroic. These failed experiments in the laboratory, these deformed creatures born in the darkness, were like moths flying towards the raging flames of the flaming devil, and were turned into ashes in the blink of an eye. Just because of an order from their master, Arthas, even if they knew they were cannon fodder, even if they could only stop Magni for less than a second, they would risk their lives to stop Magni. An instant was enough for an opportunity. After bypassing Magni, there were no more obstacles between Arthas and Duque. In order to prevent the big Muradin from charging over, he even threw out a pollute, turning the surrounding area of tens of square meters into a deposit of shadow energy. Even a being like Muradin would not survive more than 10 seconds if he were to enter this area. And Jaina made her move. She shot out 5 huge icicles. Unfortunately, The difference in their levels was like a chasm. Almost at the instant the icicles were shot out, her control over the icicles was seized by Arthis. Those icicles disintegrated in midair, opening up a path for Arthis's charge. She was clearly less than 10 meters away. At this moment, an ice dragon suddenly appeared out of thin air, materializing. Although it only stretched out half of its body, the target of its huge dragon claw was undoubtedly Arthis, not Duque. Because its name was Saffron, the second-to-last boss that had once guarded Naxxramas, and now Duque's frost elemental emissary. Traitor! Arthis raised Frostmourne, roared, and slashed at the dragon claw that stretched out. Dragons had extremely hard bones to begin with, and with the frost elemental's ice barrier level solidification, it would not be an exaggeration to say that its claws were several times harder than steel. With Frostmourne's sharpness, the heavy slash actually made a crisp sound similar to that of swords clashing. Arthis was originally a human. After losing a large amount of shadow energy, her strength could not compare to a bone dragon. After the loud sound, Frostmourne bounced off without any suspense. This slash only left a shallow white mark on the tip of Saffron's claw. However, Arthis was not the kind of guy who would give up easily. Frostmourne was clearly the size of a greatsword, but under his berserk attack, it became as fast as a sword. The rune greatsword emitting a dark blue light formed 5 phantoms in a row. They only heard clang, clang, crack, crack, crack. It should have been a continuous sound of metal clashing, but because the 5 slashes hit the same spot, after the second slash, everyone could hear the strange sound of a sharp weapon cutting into ice. Unexpectedly, Arthis completely turned Saffron's claw into an existence like ice, and then completely cut it off. Saffron immediately let out a blood-curdling scream and let his figure disappear into the void. Scum, I can kill one with 1 slash at my peak, but now it's so troublesome to deal with them. Arthis couldn't help but curse inwardly. Then you still have the nerve to split with me? Nzul cursed back at Arthis. Arthis froze for a moment, but in the end, he did not refute. To him, time was already of the essence. If he could not defeat Duque, he could forget about winning. Since the situation did not allow him to think too much, he pulled the reins, and Invincible once again turned into the phantom that seemed to be able to rush out of the sky and charged at Duque. This time, he did not dare to hold back, and directly slashed at Duque with his final ultimate move, Soul Harvest. He was afraid that Duque would use Flash to escape. However, Duque did not dodge as if he was waiting for this move, and let the shadow attack hit him. Phew. Chapter 1728. Arthis looked at Duque in disbelief. He felt that it was unreal. It was too fake. A magic demigod, and one who was proficient in spatial abilities, was determined to escape. Unless there was a very tight trap, there was almost no chance of catching him. Before this attack, he had attacked Duque countless times. Not once was successful. Every time, Duque used the smallest amount of elements to defuse his attack in the lightest way. Pay attention. This was when his soul had not split again, and his state was relatively complete and strong. Now, because of the split of his soul, his strength was actually greatly weakened. He could still have this performance because he was drawing a large amount of magic power stored in the Ice Throne. Even so, the amount of magic power input and output per unit time had been greatly reduced. In this state, it was extremely difficult for him to hit Duque. Arthis had already thought of how to use a series of moves to force Duque into a desperate situation and finally use Soul Harvest to end it. But Duque was now directly hit. There was only one explanation. Duque saw through the true nature of his move and took the initiative to hit it. How is this possible? In the spiritual sea, Arthis still let out a cry of disbelief. Who cares if it's possible or not? This is our only chance. Nzul said fiercely. As the name implied, Soul Harvest was to harvest the opponent's soul. Then where did the soul go? Naturally, it was stored in Frostmourne. If Duque was outside and endlessly extracted magic power from the weave to replenish it, it would have been a huge battle of attrition. As Duque dismantled Arthis's magic power connection, It became Duque using unlimited magic power to consume the limited magic power of the Ice Throne. No matter how much magic power was stored in the Ice Throne, it could not withstand the joint attack of Duque and the entire army outside. This kind of all-around consumption, Arthas would at most last half an hour before his magic power would be exhausted. He had to give it his all. Only by capturing Duque into Frostmourne could he completely isolate Duque's magic power connection with the outside world. If things went well, he might be able to subdue Duke's soul and make him a servant of the Lich King during the battle with Theon and the others. Duque. Although Jaina wasn't a demigod, her eyesight was enough to see that Duque had already formed a bad connection with Frostmourne. Duque's powerful elemental powers resisted the shadow energy, but his soul seemed to be pulled by the skull rune sword. Duque turned around and smiled as he waved his hand. Arthas, you underestimate me. I was a Void Lord in the Burning Legion for a period of time. Guess what will happen if you suck me into Frostmourne? Duque's words caused everyone's expression to change drastically. Arthas was surprised that Duke had managed to beat her at her own game. The others were afraid that Duque wouldn't go overboard. Regardless of what the others thought of Duque's actions, Duque's figure suddenly became blurry, as if every molecule that made up his body was disintegrating, like instant oatmeal dissolving into milk. Duque stood near the center of the platform, and everyone could see that the shadow energy on his body was rapidly fading away. In just a few seconds, his figure turned into a stream of light, like an illusion left in everyone's eyes, and sank into Frostmourne, disappearing without a trace. Boundless darkness. There was no light, and it was obscure everywhere. There was no heaven and earth. Everything seemed to be one and indistinguishable. In the thick darkness, only the bone-chilling touch was the most real. Nothing from the outside world was able to penetrate the surrounding environment in the slightest. There was no light in the darkness. For a moment, Duque almost wondered if he had come at the wrong time. But he believed in the system elf, because the retina showed that Arthas's HP had indeed reached the final stage. Duque narrowed his eyes. Suddenly, there seemed to be a flash of light in the darkness far away. Even an epic-ranked ranger with amazing eyesight would not be able to see through the thick fog. Duque saw it. With a thought, the arcane hand that he condensed with arcane elements pounced forward and tore the opening in that direction even wider. Cutting off the connection with the magic net and the elemental realm, Duque was using the elements and magic power that had accumulated in his demigod body. The darkness was surging. The world in Frostmourne seemed to be trying to stop Duque from exploring the secrets inside. Unfortunately, Duque was faster. Following the coordinates locked by the system elf, an arcane missile was launched like a light cannon. Suddenly, the dark fog seemed to be torn open, and a fierce battle unfolded in Duque's vision. It wasn't a scene that could be captured with normal vision. It was a battle of souls against souls. In his green spirit vision, there was only a highly concentrated beam of spiritual light shooting down from what was theoretically a dome, shining on a seemingly illusory magic array platform. In the middle of the magic circle, there were several incomplete humanoid spirits lying on the ground. In their broken limbs, something similar to fire was burning. The burning produced wisps of smoke-like things that slowly rose and drifted to the high altitude, where they were absorbed by the highly concentrated spiritual light. When each wisp of smoke gathered into the stream of spiritual light, it would form a strange symbol. Seeing this, Duque naturally thought of the evil sacrificial rituals that the Burning Legion fanatics used to summon demons. The only thing that surprised Duque was the two people fighting in the magic array. As a transmigrator, of course, Duque knew that the soul of King Tyrrhenas, who had been stabbed to death by Arthas, would attack at this moment. Originally, the Soul Guard of Frostmourne was supposed to be fighting with Tyrrhenas. But when Duque glanced at the so-called Soul Guard, his eyelids twitched in fear. What the hell is a Soul Guard? Nazul, what the hell are you doing here? Duque didn't realize at this moment that it was because he attacked Arthas through Kalia that Arthas's originally perfectly fused soul split again. In the end, this was still his fault. Duque only knew that he was no match for Nazul. Perhaps in the outside world, He could defeat 100 Nuzul without panting. But not here. In Frostmourne, there was a unique law that even the system elf couldn't immediately analyze. Here, at least at this moment, Duque couldn't deal with Nuzul. "Duke Marcus, I've finally found you." When Nuzul saw Duke, he immediately chased after him with his buttocks trembling. Chapter 1729. Duque was speechless. He ran away without saying a word. With a wave of his left and right hands, the surrounding shadow energy enveloped his figure. In the next moment, Duque turned himself into a shadow priest and used the ultimate skill, dissipate. When Duque temporarily broke down his body into shadow energy form, it was Nuzul's turn to be speechless. If it weren't for the consecutive battles between Northrend and Duque, Nuzul's understanding of Duque would still be stuck at more than 20 years ago. Even when Anastrian joined the Scourge army for the second time, he only got superficial information. The Sun King had no way of knowing that Duque had been seriously injured when he stabbed Archimonde to death. Instead, he had developed the strange subprofession of Shadow Priest. It was even more impossible for him to know that Duque had been the Burning Legion's Void Lord. After Grom had reported to Thrall hadn't informed Anastrian about it. The difference in information caused Nuzul to be caught off guard. Duque escaped in a somewhat awkward manner. But it was just a little awkward. As time passed, the system elf's analysis became more detailed. Duque thought to himself, well, this is the shadow energy storage place for Frostmourne. There's nothing to see there. Since it was the Lich King's private property, the shadow energy inside must have been marked by the Lich King. It was not impossible for Duque to seize it, but it would take a lot of time and effort, and it would also alarm Nuzul. Then, the place where the souls are imprisoned should be here. Duque, the great thief, first found the place where ordinary souls were imprisoned. Looking at the huge messy cage below that imprisoned thousands of souls, Duque did not even want to look at it, even though it was very likely that any random soul fragment inside could contact a Scourge army commander in the outside world. Duque continued to move forward and came to a more secluded place. There were indeed 2 soul guards in front of him, and they also had considerable power. However, in this sword world filled with shadow energy, Duque could maintain the state of dissipate for quite a long time. In their hollow vision of the spiritual world, Duque was no different from an ordinary shadow energy smoke. Perhaps this was also because Frostmourne had never had a true enemy since it was forged. Duque slipped in easily. This is, transforming back into his human form, Duque easily activated a mechanism on the wall. The bottom of the room opened up, and several altars rose up. A few soul fragments had been separated and kept on those altars. The altar was actually supported by several independent spaces that resembled safes. The system concluded that the activation method of this place was actually voice control. Do I need a verbal password? Duque frowned. System, imitate Arthas' voice. In the next moment, Duque opened his mouth again. Duque started trying random passwords. Frostmourne, Arthas Menethil, Lich King. After Duque tried 7 or 8 times, he had an idea. Sister Kalia? Immediately, the altars reacted. Several altars began to move on their own and piece together. When the independent spaces merged, the soul fragments inside also began to fuse. When these fragments finally completely fused together, they suddenly squirmed as if they were alive. They went against the flow and grew in the air. In the end, they actually formed a black soul skull. It's actually his soul. It had to be said that Duque had a very unexpected harvest. Duque raised his hand and gently used the Void Duke's technique to collect the large soul fragment into his hand. Then he activated Dissipate again and left the room. Duque continued to look for a way to break Frostmourne from the inside. Just defeating Nuzul did not seem to be enough. However, the flow of time in the sword was obviously different from the outside world. The system estimated that it was about a quarter of the flow of time in the outside world. Finally, after a few turns, Duque came to the top of Frostmourne, where the hilt should be. In front of Duque was the soul of a man with a confused appearance. His eyes were closed, as if he was sleeping. But Dooku knew that this soul should be trapped in a perpetual cycle of dreams. Only the extremely weak and slowly flickering soul fire in his chest proved that this soul had not been completely annihilated, and was not an empty shell that only had the appearance of a facade. Dooku did not know who this soul was, but he felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Dooku was sure that he should have seen this person before. But here's the question. Who is this existence that Arthas has trapped, nurtured, and even refused to destroy? Arthas's soul? At the same time, the fierce battle in the outside world had reached the most critical juncture. When Arthas once again activated Frostmourne's wrath, almost everyone outside was injured. Fortunately, the soul power reserve in Frostmourne had long since fallen below the warning line, so the power of wrath was greatly reduced this time. The three big men, Magni, Gavin Rad, and Tyrion, were all at the forefront, and the two paladins had activated their invincibility and forced their way through with holy light. Arthas, do you remember your father, Tyrannus? Tyrion roared as he slashed Ashbringer. I stabbed him to death with my sword. Arthas laughed maniacally as if he had given up on himself. He used Frostmourne to clash with Tyrion's sword, forcing Tyrion to retreat. Do you still remember Uther? Gavin Rad pounced and fought with Arthas again. When Arthas blocked Queen Sylvanal's arrow and Magni's hammer, Kalia blasted her hammer at Arthas from afar. Valinal's holy golden light blasted Frostmourne. After this, the famous Frostmourne was no longer intact. At this moment, everyone heard a sudden metallic hum. This was the sorrowful cry of the demonic sword. The golden light spun as if it was going to drill into the blade. Frostmourne's blade suddenly caved in, and a beam of golden light of different hues shot out from it. The two different hues of golden light blended together and flowed into the patterns on the rune sword. The entire sword began to shine. This was not the blue and white evil light that Frostmourne had always emitted. This was holy light that was the complete opposite of evil. Unable to control the demonic sword in his hand, Arthas watched his demonic sword float in the air with the blade facing down, hovering in the middle of the ice platform. Impossible! Arthas was completely stunned. Chapter 1730. Ha! At this moment, Theon roared, and a brilliant golden light swept across. Ashbringer was about to hit the defenseless Arthas. Suddenly, Frostmourne, which had lost control a moment ago, flew back and blocked in front of Ashbringer. Clang! Amidst the earth-shattering noise. The larger Ashbringer hit Frostmourne heavily, sending it and Arthas flying with their swords. Like a cannonball fired from an old-fashioned cannon, Arthas fell heavily to the ground, and then bounced high on the ice platform. She rolled 7 or 8 times in a row before finally stopping. Everyone was stunned, not because of the tragic situation of the Lich King Arthas, but because Frostmourne shattered. Clang! The blade was still surrounded by blue and black light, the evil runes cast on the blade, the fierce and lifelike skeleton blade. Every part represented the supreme status of the Lich King. However, in the instant that time froze, they all crumbled like butterflies in a storm. In this life, because of Dooku's obstruction, Frostmourne's battle record was not so shocking. If it was the original history, the heroes and legendary monsters that died under Frostmourne could be written into a chronicle. Black Dragon Cernux, Blue Dragon Saffron, Tyrannus, Gavin Rad Uther, Sylvanus, Anastrian Sunstrider, Orc Sword St. Jabelsos, Antonidas, Lordaeron Scourge Resistance Organization Justice Guard Leader Margolos, Lordaeron Scourge Resistance Organization Circle of Holy Light Leader Halek, Lordaeron Resistance Organization Extreme Force Leader Daglin, Edronarab Arachne Queen Nissa Azri, Bronzebeard Dwarf Bergen Firebeard Leader of the surviving members of Muradin Northrend Expedition, Draenor Seraphar, Valdemar of the Wagri clan. Not to mention, Arthas had defeated Illidan, Kael, that's Dreadlord Malganis, and the current leader of the Black Edge Knights, Darian. Just look at this shocking list of names. Even with Duque changing fate, more than half of the kings and peerless experts still fell under Frostmourn's sword. Although the strength of Lich King Arthas was not necessarily stronger than Si, Thun and the other ancient gods, Arthas's battle record was more direct and more terrifying. It was this runic demonic sword that had killed countless experts and had a glorious battle record. However, at this moment, it was finally destroyed by a group of experts with god artifacts. No! Frostmourne shattered, and Arthas could clearly feel the magic power in her body plummeting like a river. He still didn't give up. He stretched out his hand in the direction of Kalia. Be careful! Gavin Rad raised a gust of wind with his wind sword and swept Arthas up. In midair, Servanas used Solida to fire a lightning arrow at Arthas' throat. Unexpectedly, the arrow successfully pierced through Arthas' neck. No one would lower their guard against a king who stood at the pinnacle of the undying realm. Both Tyrion and Magni arrived. Firelord's hand smashed into the back of Arthas' black armor. The dark black armor of the Lich King began to disintegrate with the shoulder blade as the center. The head Tyrion's, Ashbringer, had indeed struck Arthas' left shoulder, and a huge wound extended from the left shoulder through the chest all the way to the lower right side of the abdomen. Holy golden light then violently invaded the Lich King's body. Just as Tyrion was about to kill and cut off Arthas' head on the ground, he suddenly found that the holy hammer, Valinor, had unknowingly appeared in front of him. The current queen of Lordaeron, Kalia, Arthas' sister, gently raised her hand and said 2 words, "Enough." That be careful? Tyrion was very worried. Because he was so nervous, he even stuttered. "It's over." An old voice that was strangely familiar to many people came from the void. In the next instant, 2 illusory figures, 1 silver and 1 gold, rose from the magic sword shards. Seeing the appearance of these 2 specters, almost everyone subconsciously stopped. No way! Gavin Rad's mouth was as wide as it could be, so wide that a big apple could be stuffed in. Impossible! Tyrion, who had always been strong-willed and would not easily back down at any time, could not believe his eyes at all. The figure with the illusory golden crown had long white hair, and he wore a white robe with complicated patterns, showing the dignity of the owner of the robe when he was alive. The other figure was wearing a golden helmet and golden armor, which was typical of the standard armor of the Silver Hand Knights 10 years ago. Their identities were naturally the former king of Lordaeron, Tyrinas, and the head of the 5 Silver Saints, Uther. Everyone fell into a complete state of shock. No one thought that after Arthas killed his father and master, he would actually imprison their souls in Frostmourne. Their souls had not been corrupted, nor had they been completely destroyed. Perhaps this was Arthas' last trace of kindness, or some other reason. Perhaps it was too difficult to find out. At this time, Duque's figure came out from the magic sword shards. "Are you all right?" Jaina and the other girls asked frantically. Duque shook his head. "I'm fine." Next, it's the Menethil royal family's matter. Everyone tacitly stepped back, leaving the space in the middle for Arthas, Kalia, and Tyrinas. The dark energy in Arthas's body had already receded like the tide. Without the support of the dark energy, all of Arthas's organs were rapidly deteriorating. Arthas seemed to want to struggle, but in the end he could not even move his waist. He had already lost the feeling of his lower body, and could only raise his hands in the air in a somewhat ridiculous manner, as if he was trying to grab something. A gentle and slender hand held his right hand, while a spiritual hand held his other hand. Arthas asked in a trembling voice, "Father, sister, everything's over?" Kalia used her other hand to gently caress that familiar yet cold face. She did not have the time to talk about the 20 years of longing that had accumulated in her heart, and she did not have the time to look back on the beautiful moments of the past. In the end, she could only helplessly say yes. Arthas suddenly smiled bitterly. His eyes that had almost completely lost their sight seemed to have seen the collapse of the world of the dead, and the final collapse of the kingdom that belonged to him. How beautiful the Lordaeron that should have belonged to him was, how majestic his army of undead was, and how majestic it was, sweeping across the entire continent. But at this moment, everything had become a fleeting cloud. Tyrrhenas lowered his head and let out a long sigh. My child, in the end, no king can live forever. Arthas suddenly smiled bitterly. Was it regret? An epiphany? A pity? Or despair? No one knew. The great Lich King's last words were, "In front of me is only endless darkness." Chapter 1731. Anyone with the slightest elemental sensitivity could sense that the remaining shadow power was rapidly dissipating from Arthas' body. In a sense, the demon sword, Frostmourne, was the true form of the Lich King. When the runic sword was destroyed, all the power belonging to the Lich King naturally dissipated. Watching Arthas die in the truest sense of the word, everyone present felt a sense of loss and a strange emptiness in their hearts for some reason. Even though a heinous evil sect leader had died, they felt as though they had lost a hero. Arthas' last sentence seemed to be telling everyone that he regretted what he had done in the past and had given up on the pursuit of reincarnation. In Azeroth, a person could become a vengeful spirit after death and be bound to a certain place like a earthbound spirit. For example, in the Kalimdor continent of Azhara, the vengeful spirits of the High Elves drifted in the ruins of the ancient Elven Empire for 10,000 years. Or, like Arthas, their spirits completely dissipated and returned to nothingness. Duque muttered softly, "There is no heaven or hell here. We can only rely on ourselves." Yes. Unknowingly, Duque's women gathered around him. Not only Elucia, Jaina, and Tyrant, but even Sylvanas, who had become more independent after becoming the Blood Elf Queen, came over and gently tugged on Duque's sleeve. A cold whistling sound came from the sky. No one noticed that with the destruction of Arthas' soul, the Ice Throne had once again become a part of the Ice-Crowned Fortress and was no longer a floating platform in the void. The domain around the Ice-Crowned Fortress had been removed. Faced with the fortress suddenly exposed within the range of the cannons, Bulang almost wanted to order the entire army to open fire on the spot. "Everyone, don't open fire. The Lich King Arthas has been defeated by the Alliance of Heroes. I repeat." Duque's voice was transmitted through all the communication networks of the Alliance. "Long live. We've won. Oh, wait a minute. Why are those damned bones still attacking us?" Discordant voices suddenly came from the communication networks. The ownerless undead that had been blindly wandering around the Ice-Crowned Fortress suddenly seemed to have entered a berserk state as they attacked the allied army crazily. If that was all, it would have been fine. What was even more terrifying was that even the skeletons of the Calamity soldiers that had been destroyed once on the ground began to assemble themselves again, turning into various deformed skeletal demons that attacked the coalition army. This time, the allied forces were really caught off guard. Fortunately, they had received strict training. For example, if the rear was ambushed, they should form a small defensive formation on the spot to cover each other and ensure that the team remained intact. If there was a problem with the Ice Crown Glacier, it was still within the realm of possibility. What made Duque and the leaders of the Alliance change their expressions was the report of an attack on their homeland in the Magic Communication Channel. Report. This was Eagle Nest Mountain. Damn it. So many troll skeleton soldiers. Heavens, those bones are attacking all living things, including Wildhammer dwarves and living trolls. This is the Holy Light Chapel. We were ambushed. Those damned bones are actually hiding at the bottom of the lake. This is the Satin Farm in the Western Wilderness. Damn it. I saw Joshua's grandfather who had been dead for 30 years. Damn it. He's too strong. Are these elite skeletons? Every leader of the Alliance looked at each other. Although it was Kel Thuzad who controlled the flying fortress Naxxramas to wreak havoc in the Eastern Kingdom during the Third Battle of the Dark Portal, no one knew that the Calamity Army had so many backup plans. Magni said to Duque anxiously, "We need to go back and take charge of the situation immediately. But we have more important things to do." At this time, Tyrrhena's soul, who had been kneeling beside Arthas, slowly stood up. "I have been trapped in Frostmourne for more than 10 years. In these days, I know more about the dark side of this world than any of you. This Magni was speechless. Everyone looked at the former leader of the alliance. Terenas shook his head. This world has changed. Under the efforts of the two Lich Kings, the boundary between life and death has become very blurred. This is because the Lich Kings secretly changed part of the world's laws when the world's will was asleep. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air at the same time. Who would have thought that Arthas would actually do such a thing during the 10 years that she had been asleep? The Calamity Army has become a synonym for all the dead in the world. Without Master's command, the endless Calamity Army will only become more and more of a threat to this world. We cannot stop controlling it. There must always be a Lich King. After Terenas finished, the entire Alliance hero group almost went berserk. What? Damn it. We launched this great expedition, sacrificed so many people, and wasted so many resources, not to kill a Lich King, so that the next Lich King can come to power and kill us. While everyone was arguing, Terenas reached out his hand and pointed at Darien Mograine. Since Death Knights can join the righteous side, why can't we allow a Lich King who believes in the holy light and is willing to fight for the righteous cause of Azeroth? Terenas' words made sense, and no one could refute him. You mean? Imriel tried to ask. If there is a strong man with a strong body that can withstand a large amount of shadow energy, and a strong will that will not be corrupted by the grievances of billions of undead, he will become the new Lich King. One day, he will be the greatest help to the Alliance. Terenas said with certainty. Everyone was silent. First, the strongest body was enough to eliminate everyone who had not reached legendary hero level. Then, there was the condition of having a strong will. In fact, the candidates had already been decided, Duque and Tyrion. Gavin Rad should have been able to do it, but ever since he became a paladin who trained in lightning, his direction of development was a little off. Duque had endured the most terrifying shadow corruption, and he became the world's first shadow priest. But obviously, Duque was not suitable. Not only was he the supreme commander of the Alliance, but he was also the man of several queens. Who could bear the thought of their own man becoming the king of the undead? Without the slightest hesitation, Theon stepped out of the ranks. He held Ashbringer in one hand and said loudly, "It seems that I am the only one who can bear this heavy burden. No one else can." Chapter 1732. Before Tyrion Fordring could finish, Uther suddenly interrupted him. "Tyrion, you hold a cruel fate in your hands, brother. But it doesn't just belong to you." "Wait, you don't have a body?" Gavin Rad was a little confused. Uther smiled and shook his head. Terenas raised his scepter, and suddenly a mysterious sarcophagus broke out from under the ice platform. Uther's golden soul slowly stepped into the sarcophagus. When the sarcophagus opened again, what appeared in front of everyone was a Death Knight named Uther the Lightbringer. The other two, who were once part of the 5 Silver Saints, could not believe their eyes. They all clenched their fists. Terenas sighed. After Arthas killed Uther, he moved his body here. That child always wanted his teacher to become a Death Knight, because that way he could have one of the few Death Knights in the world that could rival him. He tortured Uther and tried to persuade him, but Uther never agreed. Uther laughed at himself, his face deathly pale. "Ha! This is my first time being a Death Knight. But I just destroyed Nazul's soul, and from his soul fragments, I got some Death Knight skills. Maybe I'll be a very good Death Knight." This kind of joke, which was so cold that it made people despair, naturally did not attract any laughter. Uther also gave up. He pointed at the symbol of the Lich King, the crown of ice that Arthas had always worn. "Do it, Tyrion. You and these brave heroes have your own destiny to fulfill. Leave this final sacrifice to me. In any case, I was already a dead man 11 years ago." Wuther's heroic voice resounded through the world. The wind was howling. Everyone's heart gradually lost its temperature due to the pain of the ice and snow of Northrend. Uther strode in front of Duque. "Duque, thank you for releasing my soul, and thank you for all you've done for the Alliance all these years. I had failed in raising Arthas. Now I'm just shouldering my responsibility. Don't be sad for me, don't be sad for me." This is nothing but the self-redemption of a lost and suffering soul. Duque's mouth squirmed for a long time, but he couldn't say anything in the end. This was 2F** Ket up. He had deliberately hidden Bolivar Fortigen. Well, Bolivar had been saved, and Uther, who was even more formidable, had been lost. From Duque's point of view, Uther was even more powerful and awesome. If he could bring Uther into the weave, the weak holy system that could only heal and not attack would become the strongest branch of the weave. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. This was fate. Perhaps, this was not a bad ending. No matter what, it was better than Uther, the strongest holy knight in history, completely retiring from the stage of history. However, since Uther had decided to become the Lich King, in that case, what kind of power would this Lich King, who was probably the strongest Lich King in history, display at the time of Return of the Legion? Duque suddenly had deep expectations. The third Lich King was already so awesome. Wouldn't the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse of the third generation under him rise as well? Duque's mind was in a mess. He could only watch in a daze as Uther left him and walked towards his old brother. This was not Uther's fault. In this life, Uther rarely had the chance to interact with Duque. To be honest, Duque was not good at dealing with people who were pure in their beliefs. They were almost like ascetics or Puritans. In addition to the 5 years at the Dark Portal, Duque had been blasted into the void with Karazhan. He and Uther were not really close friends. They were just slightly better than nodding acquaintances. Gavin Rad. Uther. Because Gavin Rad was not from Rotterdam, his relationship with the other 4 holy knights was far from close. This did not prevent them from seriously understanding each other, and during the days of fighting side by side at the Dark Portal, they had forged a deep friendship. After talking for about 3 minutes, Uther hugged Gavin Rad again. Finally, he stood in front of Tyrion. Among so many people, his friendship with Tyrion was the deepest. Among the 5 Silver Saints, Tyrion's philosophy and ideas were the closest to his. Thanks to this life, Tyrion had been blasted into the void with Duque, and there had not been a falling out between Tyrion and Uther. The friendship between them could be said to be stronger than gold. After some small talk, Uther said solemnly, "You must forget me, Tyrion. If this world is to be freed from the shackles of fear, no one must ever know what happened here today." But Tyrion choked. Uther's face was stern, and his words were sonorous. "I heard that you worship my name as sacred. In that case, you should tell them that the Lich King is dead. Uther's soul, which was captured by Arthas back then, has long since dissipated. Go. Leave this place. Never come back." Finally, Tyrion nodded heavily. The Alliance of Heroes left. Many people looked back with every step they took. From time to time, they would look at the familiar figure sitting on the throne of ice. He was wearing the most sacred armor of the Silver Hands, and his body was emitting a brilliant holy light that did not match at all. But he was crowned with the Lich King's crown of the dead. The only good thing was that he was not too lonely. A former king stood beside him as a servant. "Is this okay? Your Majesty." Uther smiled bitterly. The king that he had sworn to serve for the rest of his life had become his assistant. What the hell was this? The living return to the living, the dead to the dead. Right now, I am just a soul atoning for my sins. I was once a good king, but also a terrible father. If this can truly put my son's soul to rest, it will do it. Besides, I still have Kalia. Since the bloodline can continue, I am satisfied. I am satisfied. Tyrinas said seriously. "Your Majesty." Uther sighed. Tyrinas showed a somewhat funny smile. "No, no, no, you are my Majesty now. You." When Duque and the others stepped out of the Ice-Crown Citadel, the entire Ice-Crown Citadel immediately formed huge blocks of ice and began to seal the entire citadel. This scene caused the Alliance soldiers to open their eyes wide and tongue-tied. Then, Tyrion raised the blade of Frostmourne, which only had half of it left. The Lich King Arthas has been defeated by the Alliance of Heroes. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.